The Grandfather Paradox. You step out of the machine. It's cold. The street is unfamiliar, lined with gas lamps and brick facades. In your pocket, a photograph of a man. The date stamped on the bottom is decades before your birth. You have come with a purpose. The man in the photo is your grandfather, and if you stop him tonight, if you make sure he never meets your grandmother, then you will never be born. And yet, here you are. This is the heart of the Grandfather Paradox. A time traveler alters the past in a way that would erase their own existence. But if you were never born, how could you have traveled back in time at all? It's a perfect contradiction, a causal knot with no loose ends to pull. Some versions are violent, murdering your ancestor. Others are accidental. You start a fire, or inspire a different marriage, or simply miss your chance to return. Either way, the result is the same. A loop that devours itself. And the implications are disturbing. Because this paradox doesn't just challenge logic, it destabilizes identity. If the past can be rewritten, then the present is never fixed. If your choices ripple backward, then memory becomes meaningless. History, a hallway of locked doors, or none at all. One proposed solution is the multiple timelines idea. Change the past, and you split reality. You don't erase yourself, you just jump tracks. But if that's true, you never affect your own origin. Your actions echo, but only into other yous. Another solution is determinism, that you simply can't alter the past. That time will twist to protect itself. You might try to stop your grandfather, only to discover your interference was what led him to your grandmother in the first place. Fate wears many masks. But here's the question that lingers. What if you could change the past, but only by introducing something that doesn't belong? What if you left behind a note, a tool, an idea that had no clear beginning? What if you gave your grandfather a piece of knowledge, one you never created, only delivered? That's when the paradox shifts, from erasure to inception. The Bootstrap Paradox. You walk into a dusty antique shop tucked in a back alley. On a shelf, under flickering light, rests a worn leather notebook. You open it, and your blood runs cold. It is your handwriting. Inside, page after page, your own words. Things you haven't written yet, thoughts you haven't thought. You read instructions, build a machine, use it, and then years later, you travel back, leave the notebook on that shelf, and vanish into time. But who wrote the notebook? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a loop in which information or an object has no point of origin. It exists only because it was sent back in time. A song with no composer, a machine with no inventor, a story told endlessly, passed hand to hand, never truly born. It's named after the absurd idea of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, lifting yourself off the ground by tugging on your own shoes, causality eating its own tail. In this paradox, nothing is broken. Time holds together. There's no contradiction, no erasure. Everything fits, but something still feels wrong, because it violates intuition. Logic, the very idea of cause and effect. How can something exist without ever being created? Imagine this. A scientist reads blueprints for a device in a mysterious book. She builds it. It works. Years later, she travels back in time and hands the book to her younger self. The loop closes, but who designed the device? The knowledge has no origin. The book is a ghost of information, forever circling itself. Perfect, untouched, untethered. Some physicists say this is allowed by certain solutions to general relativity, closed time-like curves. As long as the loop is self-consistent, it doesn't break the laws of physics, but it breaks something else. It breaks meaning. Because invention without origin means no creativity, no discovery. Its existence stripped of story. And it gets stranger. What if not just a notebook, but a person entered a loop, born from the past, living into the future, returning to cause their own birth? Then you don't just erase authorship, you erase free will. You become a passenger in your own timeline, acting out a script that always was and always will be. And somewhere in that loop, purpose dissolves. But if you never had a choice, why does it still feel like you do? The Predestination Paradox. He has studied every detail: the fire, the lost lives, the chain reaction that changed history. He knows the hour, the location, the cause. He arrives, breathless, just in time to intervene. A man travels back in time to prevent a tragedy. But what he does to prevent the disaster causes it. The very act of trying to change the past locks it into place. This is the Predestination Paradox, a trap of time where the attempt to rewrite history is exactly what fulfills it. You try to stop an event, only to discover your interference was always part of the timeline. There was never an alternative. It's not just circular, it's cruel. Because it presents the illusion of choice while denying its reality. The paradox is stitched into stories of prophecy, of fate, of desperate escape that only closes the trap. Imagine a woman haunted by a dream. She sees herself saving a stranger from a crash. One day, the moment arrives. She leaps forward, pulls him clear, and realizes the crash only happened because she was there. Without her, the man would never have crossed the road. Cause and effect blur. Time folds. Predestination paradoxes aren't about things that don't make sense. They're about things that make too much sense. Every step leads to the next, perfectly. But the circle never opens. There is no freedom, only participation. In this loop, your choices are scripted, but you never know it. That's what makes it chilling. Because even as you act, even as you struggle to change the outcome, you're fulfilling your part. And the loop can go deeper. What if you met someone in the past who changed your life, inspired your path, drove your mission, and then you learn that person was you? You were always meant to come back. This paradox plays out like myth, like destiny, like tragedy carved in stone, and it asks a terrifying question. You were always meant to cause the thing you tried to prevent. If your actions are foretold, if the future is already written, what does it mean to act at all? Is resistance just performance? Is the rebel just a cog in the clock? And if your fight against evil becomes the reason it rose in the first place, then what happens when the villain you return to stop is infamous enough to shape the whole world? The Hitler Paradox. You stand in 1919. A young man walks by, unremarkable. His paintings have just been rejected again. He is bitter, directionless, forgettable. And yet you know who he becomes. You've come back with one goal: to stop him, to rewrite a century, to prevent a war, a genocide, an ideology that shattered millions of lives. You've rehearsed the moral weight, imagined the headlines erased, wondered if history could forgive the cost of a single life spared to save so many. But no matter what you do, it goes wrong. You intervene. Maybe you kill him. Maybe you steer him elsewhere. But the horror still comes, sometimes worse. A new figure rises in his place. One more cunning, more efficient. Sometimes it's your interference itself that galvanizes events, reshapes the narrative, or accelerates the chaos. And if you do nothing, you live with knowing you might have changed it. This is the Hitler Paradox, a time travel dilemma rooted not just in logic, but in ethics. It asks not just can you change history, but should you, and what the consequences might be, even with the best intentions. It blends the grandfather paradox with the predestination trap, but layers in something more disturbing: moral contamination. Because you, the traveler, become part of the story. The one who tried to edit evil and maybe made it worse. Philosophers have dissected this dilemma for decades. If time is changeable, what defines responsibility? If it's fixed, what defines futility? And if history must happen, is evil inevitable? In fiction, the Hitler paradox is a cautionary tale. It warns that the past is woven too tightly to pull just one thread, that removing a monster might unbalance the web. That heroism in hindsight becomes hubris in action. But it also haunts the traveler, because once you possess foreknowledge, you can't unknow. You're no longer a tourist. You're complicit. Whether you act or abstain, the future carries your fingerprint. And the question echoes, if you change history to prevent atrocity but cause another, have you saved anyone or just shifted the tragedy? Perhaps the only way to escape this tangle is to leave the thread entirely. Not to undo, but to step sideways. Into another version of time, one where history split before the blood was spilled. The parallel universe loop. You step into the machine, not to change your past, but to reach another one. You've run the calculations. The moment the dial spins, you don't go backward, you go sideways, a ripple through the fabric of possibility, and when you arrive, everything is the same. Almost. The sky is a slightly different hue. A book you've never read sits on your shelf. Your neighbor's dog barks with a voice that doesn't quite match memory. But the real shock comes when you meet yourself. You watch them from a distance. They talk like you, move like you, but something's different. Their choices, their rhythm, their regrets. They diverged. You aren't copies. You're cousins. And then you realize why you're here. Your own timeline broke. A mistake. A tragedy. Something you couldn't fix. So you escaped into a neighboring strand of the multiverse. You weren't trying to undo the past. You were trying to replace it. This is the parallel universe loop, a time travel paradox that doesn't bend time but reality. It's the idea that every choice branches a new world, and if you travel between them, you can escape causality altogether. But there's a price. Because when you step out of your own world and into another, you bring something with you, your memory, your guilt, your interference. And if you stay too long, you alter the new timeline. A small word here, a gesture there, a moment of kindness or cruelty you didn't mean to repeat, and the world begins to change, to ripple. And soon, it too becomes unstable, unfamiliar. You feel it closing in. So you run again, to another branch, another variation, another self. Each escape leaves a mark, each world a little less stable than the last. And the loop forms, not in time, but in reality. A recursive flight across infinities, trying to find one where you don't make the same mistake, but you always do. Because the constant isn't the world. It's you. You're the variable carried across timelines, looping not through hours or years, but through consequences. And it raises a deeper question. If every version of you carries the same origin, the same core experience that shaped you, then is it truly a new world? Or just a refracted mirror of the same unchangeable root? And if you trace that root back far enough, what do you find? A beginning? Or something that was never caused at all? The uncaused cause. Trace the thread of anything far enough, your life, your thoughts, this very moment, and you eventually ask, where did it begin? And what if the answer is, nowhere? The uncaused cause is the paradox of something that exists without origin. No spark before it, no reason behind it. It simply is. It's one of the oldest dilemmas in philosophy. If every effect must have a cause, and every cause must be preceded by another, then what lies at the root? What was the first domino? What moved the unmoved? In religious traditions, it's often answered with divinity, a being outside of time, immune to cause and effect. In physics, some speculate about quantum fluctuations, spontaneous events without known origin. But in time travel, the question gets sharper. Because when you fold time, you can create loops, objects, events, even people whose existence depends only on their presence within the loop. A scientist finds blueprints for a machine, builds it, later travels back and leaves the blueprints for their younger self, who then finds them, and so on. The machine exists, but no one ever invented it. It's not just a bootstrap paradox. It's a deeper problem because it removes not only the author, but the origin of the idea itself. And that's where the uncaused cause becomes terrifying. It implies that meaning, progress, even creation can be unrooted, that something can appear in the world without genesis, that the seed of existence doesn't require soil. But this cuts both ways. Because if causality has no floor, if something can exist without being caused, then anything is possible. Even you. What if you were born into a loop? What if your presence in the past ensured your existence in the future? What if the thing that caused you was you? It's not just a riddle, it's a mirror. Because you live each day tracing back choices, searching for reason, trying to understand who you are by looking at where you've been. But if the path folds back on itself, if the first step was also the last, then you're not a story unfolding, you're a shape drawn in air, a figure eight of identity, looping forever. And when you look for the first moment, the source, the spark that set it all in motion, you find only the echo of something that was never lit, a flame that simply burns. A question that answers itself by asking again. The Ontological Paradox. You wake in a hospital bed. No memory, no name, just a notebook beside you. Inside, detailed instructions. How to find a certain building, how to meet a certain person, how to deliver a message that feels strangely familiar. You follow the instructions. Step by step, the people you find seem to know you. They trust you. Eventually, one of them gives you a package, tells you to protect it, tells you to pass it on. Years pass. You keep the promise. One day, you meet someone who's lost, amnesiac, disoriented. You give them the package, leave a notebook, and realize they're you. The ontological paradox is a special kind of time loop, not just a loop of events, but a loop of origin. It traps objects, people, or ideas in a causal cycle with no external source. They exist only because they cause themselves to exist. The term ontological comes from the study of being, of existence itself. And this paradox challenges the very nature of that existence, because if something can emerge purely from a time loop, then it defies not only creation, but explanation. A famous example, a time traveler brings a book back in time and leaves it on a table. Someone finds it, publishes it, and it eventually reaches the traveler, who then takes it back. Who wrote the book? The answer, no one, or everyone, or just the loop. But where did the information come from? What sparked the idea? The object? The person? In this paradox, existence is circular, not linear. The past depends on the future. The future depends on the past. Remove either, and both collapse. And it's not just theory. Stories, songs, identities, even beliefs can fall into this structure. A child inspired by a legend grows up to become the figure behind the myth. A woman raises a girl who becomes her own mother. An inventor receives blueprints for a machine she will one day build and send back. No beginning, no end. Just presence. Looping. Some physicists argue this kind of paradox is logically consistent. It doesn't break causality, just reshapes it. Others find it deeply unsettling. A universe that allows this is a universe without clear origin, without grounding, without accountability. But perhaps that's the true discomfort. Because if ideas, objects, even people can emerge from closed causal circles, then so can identity. And if you meet someone, help them become who they are, only to realize that person is you, then who came first? Who is the original? And who is just the echo? The identity swap loop. You're chasing a criminal through time. They've escaped into the past, vanished into history. You follow them, mission clear, find them, stop them, return, but tracking across timelines is messy. You change clothes, grow older, wait for signals that never arrive. Until one day, you find someone. They seem out of place. You watch from a distance, then up close. And slowly, a truth begins to bloom. Horrifying, slow, undeniable. The person you've been hunting is you. The loop wasn't around them, it was around you. A twist in time, unnoticed until it closes, until the hunter becomes the hunted, until you realize every step forward was a step back. This is the identity swap loop, a paradox of mistaken or transformed identity within a closed timeline. It's not about causality or creation, it's about the collapse of self. And the deeper you fall, the harder it becomes to tell who you were before the loop began. These loops thrive on confusion. You impersonate someone to get close to them, only to become that person. You inherit a name for a mission, only to grow into it. You remove someone from history, only to step into their place. And you wonder, was that the plan all along? Time doesn't care about continuity of memory. It cares about roles being filled, events happening, a cycle staying closed. If you occupy the right space at the right moment, you become the necessary piece. But what happens to your sense of self? Imagine being trained to protect someone, only to discover you raised them. Imagine building your own enemy without knowing it. Imagine escaping your own shadow only to realize you are the shadow. Identity becomes a function of position, not personality. You don't remember becoming them. But here you are, saying the lines, living the moments, filling the frame they once did. And when the loop is tight enough, you can't tell the difference. Somewhere, your original self was lost, swapped, overwritten, adapted, not by force, but by fit. Because time loops don't need villains or victims. They need shapes that match. And when the last twist lands, you're not even sure whether you lost your identity or found it. Because the loop didn't just catch your body, it rewrote your role. And when everything repeats again, the cycle doesn't ask who you are, only whether you'll play your part, even if the part was always yours to begin with. The causal loop. You set a mug on your desk. It wobbles slightly, then steadies. You turn to reach for a pen. When you turn back, the mug is gone. A flicker of confusion, then a flash of memory. You remember, barely, that tomorrow you'll travel back. You'll hide the mug. Right now, you glance behind the bookcase. It's there. You've just completed a loop. A closed time-like curve, a path through space-time that folds back onto itself. In theory, it's allowed by Einstein's equations under extreme conditions, rotating black holes, wormholes, cosmic strings. In fiction, it's a loop where cause and effect chase each other's tail. In a causal loop, every event is both cause and effect. You receive information that you later deliver. You pass an object that you later retrieve. Nothing breaks, but nothing starts, either. There's no first mover, no true origin, just a circle. Imagine receiving a blueprint for a machine. You build it. Years later, you hand the blueprint to your younger self. The loop closes, but no one designed it. The design is preserved only because the loop exists. This isn't a paradox in the traditional sense. It doesn't result in contradiction. The timeline is self-consistent. Every action fits. Every piece lands in place. But something deeper feels wrong. Because a causal loop defies our sense of linear time. We expect things to begin, to be created, to evolve. But in a closed loop, everything just is because it always was. You were inspired by a mentor who turned out to be you. You learned from a book you eventually wrote. You solved a mystery whose only solution was your own future action. It's perfect. It's seamless. It's sterile. And it raises a question. If you live in a loop, is your life yours? Because loops remove choice. They trap you in consistency. You act because you remember acting. You remember because you acted. Even your thoughts may not be your own. They might be echoes from a future that already knows what you'll do. Free will dissolves into logic. And if time is shaped like this, if it's not a line, but a circle, then what of destiny, of originality, of truth. Or worse, what if all the loops are real? Not just one timeline, but countless causal curves spinning, rewriting, overlapping like stories, stored somewhere, cataloged, waiting for you to read them all. The Library of Alternate Futures. You walk into a room that shouldn't exist. Its walls stretch infinitely in every direction, lined with shelves, and on those shelves, books. Each one titled with a date that hasn't happened yet. Each filled with the story of a life not yet lived. You pull one down. The name on the cover is yours. Inside your choices, your failures, your triumphs, the house you might buy, the person you might love, the war you might start or stop. All written as if it's already happened. You pull another, and another. Each book is different. In one, you live quietly. In another, you vanish young. In another still, you rise to heights you can't even imagine, 1,000 versions of you. All plausible, all waiting. This is the Library of Alternate Futures, a conceptual paradox where every possible timeline is not just real, but recorded, accessible, readable. Not predictions, not prophecies. Actuals. Time, not as a line, but a lattice of branching paths. And somehow, you are allowed to browse. But here's the danger. What happens when you begin choosing your future, not by living it, but by selecting it from a shelf? Every action becomes a reference. Every moment, a citation. Did you fall in love because you were meant to, or because you read you would? Did you avoid danger because of intuition, or because you skipped ahead? Free will starts to dissolve, not because you don't choose, but because every choice feels pre-written, and every word you speak carries the weight of déjà vu. You become a reader of your own life, and the more you read, the less you feel. Experience flattens. Surprise becomes illusion. Regret becomes impossible, but so does joy. Because possibility was what made you human. And in this library, possibility becomes inventory. Some philosophers argue that all futures exist simultaneously, that each moment holds every branching potential, and reality is merely the one path we happen to walk. Others say the future is fluid, always collapsing under the weight of observation. But what if observation fixes it? What if by reading your future, you lock it in place? Or worse, what if someone else is reading you? What if this life you're living right now is not the original, but just one story from a shelf? And someone is turning the page, waiting to see what you'll do next. Or worse, already knows. The memory leak paradox. You've been here before. The walls feel familiar. The scent in the air. The sound of a clock that's not ticking but pulsing. You recognize it, and yet you don't. You reach for a memory that should explain why this moment feels like déjà vu, but what comes back isn't a clear picture. It's a feeling, a sense of something having slipped away, like waking from a dream and losing it all before the words form. You know something happened before this, something important, but it won't come. This is the memory leak paradox. It's not about time travel in the physical sense. It's about what happens to memory when you tamper with time. If experience defines who you are, then what happens when experience itself doesn't hold still? Picture this: a person travels back in time and changes a key moment in their life, stopping an accident, ending a relationship early, walking away from a job. Their memories begin to adapt, rewriting themselves to fit the new timeline. But not completely. Fragments remain. Ghosts of lives that were never lived, images of people they never met, feelings tied to events that no longer happened, like corrupted files on a disk that's been rewritten one too many times. The mind doesn't fully overwrite the old reality. It just tries to hold both. Over time, the traveler begins to doubt their own thoughts. They remember having siblings they never had, scars that don't exist, conversations with people who, in this timeline, never existed at all. It's not madness. It's a mismatch between timeline and memory, a result of dragging consciousness through rewired reality. The more jumps, the worse it gets. Eventually, there's no stable narrative, just impressions, shadows, the sense of having forgotten something massive, though you can't say what. And the paradox deepens. If your mind reshapes itself with every change, then who are you? Are you still the person who made those decisions, or are you simply the one who now remembers a scrambled version of them? In some interpretations, time travel protects causality by reformatting memory to fit the new present. You are made to forget the impossible, but if the forgetting isn't perfect, if echoes remain, then those leaks become hauntings, not of ghosts, but of lost realities. And in the quiet spaces between thoughts, they whisper, "You were someone else. You lived another life. And now, you've forgotten why." The free will elimination loop. Imagine discovering that every decision you've ever made was already written. You wake one morning to a message, not a prediction, not a threat, but a log, a full transcript of what you'll do for the next 30 days. Every word you'll say, every mistake you'll make, every small triumph. It's not general, it's exact, and it's perfect. You test it, take a different route, speak a different phrase, but each deviation was already listed. Even your attempt to defy it was included, word for word. You are not being watched, you are being read. At first, you're horrified, then skeptical, then numb. Because if everything is predetermined, down to your protests, what's the point in pretending to choose? This is the free will elimination loop, a paradox not of broken causality, but of total containment. A loop so tight, so recursive, that free will becomes indistinguishable from choreography. You're not acting, you're executing code, playing out a script written by the future and enforced by the past. The loop might be closed by time travel, by a future self sending information backward, or by a causality feedback system so complete that your reactions have no flexibility. Every path you could take is already taken. Every doubt you feel was pre-assigned. Some argue that this doesn't violate free will, that acting out your nature, even if predictable, still counts as choice. But the deeper the loop, the harder it is to hold on to that belief. Especially when you begin receiving messages from yourself, not advice. Instructions. You find journals, letters, recordings, all sent by a version of you who's already lived through this moment. Each note guiding your next move. And the more you follow them, the more you realize they're not guiding, they're binding. You try to stop, burn the pages, ignore the voice. But you've already done that too. And the message always finds its way back. Even your rebellion has been rehearsed. In such a loop, identity starts to blur. Are you the originator of your thoughts, or just their current carrier? If your future self controls your present, then who are you really? A puppet with memory, or an actor reciting lines that were handed down before you could speak. And if you try to cut the loop, to end the control, to reclaim agency, then you face the final question: can you kill the part of yourself that knows what happens next? Or will you simply play the role you were always meant to? The kill your future self dilemma. You receive a message from the future, not from someone else, from yourself. The voice is older, sharper, tired. It tells you that things will go wrong, terribly wrong, that you, your future self, have become someone you were never meant to be, that too much power, too much pain, too many compromises have turned you into something dangerous. And it pleads, stop this before it's too late. Kill me. The message includes a date, a location, a time window. You don't want to believe it. But the evidence piles up. Newspaper clippings, fingerprints, security footage of things you haven't done yet. And all of it suggests the same future. You, unrecognizable. This is the kill your future self dilemma. It's not a loop about the past. It's about the cost of the future. A reversal of the grandfather paradox, where instead of erasing your origin, you're asked to erase your destiny. But the question isn't whether it's possible, it's whether it's right. Because in this paradox, you are both executioner and target. You must choose whether to trust your current values or the warning of a version of you shaped by decades of experiences you haven't had. Maybe they've become paranoid or corrupt or desperate. Maybe they're telling the truth. Maybe they're manipulating you to preserve their own existence. And deeper still, maybe they're right. Maybe the path you're on leads to something monstrous, a collapse of ethics, a surrender to convenience, a betrayal you can't yet imagine. Killing them might be the only way to stop it. But how do you kill someone you haven't become? Do you pull the trigger and hope you're saving a future stranger? Or do you let them live, believing you can break the chain through better choices? And what if the act of deciding proves the transformation? If you hesitate, does that mean you're already slipping? If you go through with it, does that mean you've already crossed the line? The dilemma is tight. Whatever you do, it loops inward. You become part of the timeline your future self warned about. You make their memory real, and the question echoes louder than ever. Is the danger your future self, or the version of you that believes they need to be stopped? Because once you take aim at the person you'll become, the difference between justice and self-destruction becomes very, very hard to see. Especially when the version in your sights knows exactly what you're about to do. The inverse butterfly effect. In chaos theory, the butterfly effect suggests that a single flap of wings in one part of the world might cause a hurricane in another. Tiny causes, massive consequences. But what if it worked the other way? What if massive intentional actions had no noticeable impact at all? You travel back in time to prevent a catastrophe. You sabotage machines, issue warnings, redirect key decisions. You act boldly, decisively. And then, nothing changes. The war still starts. The flood still comes. The loss still happens. Not only that, your interference vanishes into the folds of history, absorbed and neutralized as if it had always been there. This is the inverse butterfly effect, a time travel paradox where dramatic efforts to change the future are swallowed by the overwhelming inertia of events. No matter how large your choices, time bends to accommodate them, leaving the outcome unchanged. At first, it feels like bad luck, then denial. Then the chilling realization sets in. This isn't coincidence, it's structure. The timeline is more resistant than expected, not fixed exactly, but self-healing. A web stretched tight, snapping back into shape no matter how you twist it. Your attempt to delay a breakthrough only shifts it to another lab. Your plea to a world leader backfires into motivation. Your act of sabotage leads to a workaround that arrives at the same endpoint, perhaps even sooner. Causality becomes a fortress, and you are nothing but wind against its walls. This isn't determinism in the strictest sense. It's something more insidious, selective plasticity. The timeline gives way just enough to absorb your efforts without shifting the final result. The script remains unchanged, even if the lines are shuffled. And with each failed attempt, you begin to question the power of intervention itself. If great efforts accomplish nothing, what about small ones? Do intentions matter? Do ethics hold weight in a universe that absorbs them without response? The paradox isn't that nothing changes. It's that everything does, just not enough. Perhaps the butterfly effect never promised disaster from a single flap. Perhaps it only meant that sensitivity exists if the conditions are perfect. But when the wings beat and nothing stirs, you're left with a different kind of chaos. A quiet world immune to disruption. A future that watches your struggle and folds it neatly into its design. And the question that haunts you, if time cannot be bent by intention, then what can it be bent by? The stolen invention paradox. You hold in your hand a blueprint. It's complex, beautiful, unlike anything the world has seen. You didn't draw it. You found it, left behind, forgotten, or sent back by someone who vanished before they could explain. You build it. It works. History remembers you as the genius who changed everything, the one who launched the revolution, unlocked the discovery, solved the riddle. Your name becomes legend. The world moves forward. And then one day, years later, you travel back. You leave the blueprint. You vanish. And the paradox reveals itself. This is the stolen invention paradox, a tighter variation on the bootstrap loop. It explores what happens when credit, authorship, and origin are displaced, not by error, but by design. An invention that exists without ever being truly invented. An achievement with no achievement behind it. The brilliance was never yours. But it is attributed to you, because the loop ensures that someone has to build it, and the loop picked you. It's easy to romanticize this paradox. The idea of discovering something lost, carrying it forward, closing the circuit. But the deeper implications are disquieting. Because this isn't just about an idea trapped in time, it's about value without effort, reward without authorship, recognition without origin. And worse, what if the original inventor never existed at all? What if the knowledge was always past, never created? You weren't chosen, you were convenient, a cog in the timeline's machinery, turning where it must. Your accolades, your genius, your transformation into a figure of history, built on a phantom act of discovery. It feels like fraud, but no one sees it that way. Not in the timeline you've sealed. In the world you inhabit, you are the origin. You brought the fire. But deep down you know, and the question gnaws at you. If an invention has no true source, does it matter who carries it? Does progress require honesty, or just delivery? And what happens when your legacy is built on knowledge that never had a beginning? Are you a pioneer, or just a courier? The world may never know, but somewhere the paradox continues. And in the silence between cause and effect, something else begins to stir. A gaze, a presence, watching not the invention, but the inventor. The Observer Creation Paradox. A camera records a man walking through a plaza. He moves with purpose, looks up, then disappears. A researcher plays the footage again and again, trying to understand the event. The man appears only when the camera is watching. There's no trace of him before or after the moment. Security teams sweep the area. No one remembers seeing him. No identification. No witnesses. Nothing. And yet there he is, in frame. Clear, crisp, real. Eventually, the researcher decides to dig deeper. She builds a better camera, sets it to capture every angle, every frequency. She waits. And then, on a perfectly ordinary day, the man appears again. Only this time, he waves at the camera. This is the Observer Creation Paradox. A riddle where the act of observation doesn't just record reality, it creates it. It's not simply that you affect what you see by looking. It's that the thing you're seeing might not exist until you look. It plays with ideas from quantum mechanics, the observer effect, wave function collapse, the notion that particles exist in superposition until measured. But here the implications extend beyond particles. They reach into the structure of time itself. In this paradox, an entity or an event comes into being only because someone is watching for it, and once it exists, it becomes part of the timeline. A fixture. A fact. But if the observer hadn't looked, hadn't built the tools to notice, hadn't asked the right question, it would never have been there at all. So who created it? Was the man in the footage always meant to exist, or did the researcher pull him into reality through attention alone? Some argue this is how consciousness itself might work, that the universe responds to awareness, that reality sharpens under focus, but time complicates this further. Because if an observer creates the observed and the observed shapes the past, then memory, history, even identity become unstable. You remember seeing something, that memory locks it in place, but if you forget it, if you stop looking, does it fade? Or was it never real to begin with? And more chillingly, what if you were created this way? Not born, not caused, just watched into existence. A self unfolding because someone or something pointed a lens into your direction and waited for the shape to form. And if that gaze turns away, will you remain? Or dissolve back into the probabilities you came from? The camera's still running, and now it seems to be turning inward. The self-editing timeline. The journal changes while you sleep. Last night, it said you visited Rome in 2015. This morning, the entry is gone. In its place is a trip to Cairo, a memory you don't recognize. Yet as you read, you begin to feel the warmth of a desert sun. You taste unfamiliar spices. The memory settles in like it was always there. You check old photos. The timestamps still say Rome, but in some of the frames, the architecture isn't quite right. The skyline has shifted. The details don't add up. You didn't just forget. The timeline corrected itself. This is the self-editing timeline. Not a loop, not a branch, but a flowing, mutable stream that overwrites its own past to preserve its current state. It rewrites cause to match effect, rearranges events, reshapes memories, even edits physical records. You don't notice because it's seamless, because noticing would break the illusion. At first, it feels like faulty memory, then glitching technology, but eventually you realize the inconsistency isn't in your mind. It's in reality. The timeline is conscious, not as a being, but as a system, adaptive, surgical, intelligent enough to ensure coherence. You leave a message for yourself. Hide it. When you return, it's been redacted, not erased, just reworded. It still fits the new version of events. Your intent, your urgency, all softened to match the new history. Even your handwriting agrees. In this paradox, the timeline doesn't resist change. It absorbs it. Every deviation is accounted for. Every fracture healed by altering the foundation. But what's sacrificed is truth. Because if the past changes to fit the present, then evidence means nothing. Causality becomes theater, and you, the traveler, the anomaly, the misfit, are a variable constantly being rewritten into something less disruptive. You wonder how many times it's happened before, how many lives you've lived that were smoothed away, how many identities have been edited into compliance. And the question follows. If the timeline changes the past to keep the future stable, what happens to the version of you that no longer fits? Where do they go? Are they erased? Or relocated, shifted out of sync with reality until they vanish like shadows burned from photographs? You look in the mirror and wonder which version of you is being remembered, and which one is being overwritten, line by quiet line. The vanishing point traveler. You meet someone who claims they're from the future, not in theory, in person. They know things they shouldn't. Passwords, events. They say they've jumped across time for decades, correcting small fractures, keeping the timeline intact. They have one request: remember them. You agree. It seems harmless. You talk, learn their name, their story, and then, one day, they vanish. Not just physically. From records, from memory, from photographs and files. You try to hold on to their face, but it slips through your thoughts like fog through fingers. You're not forgetting. You're being edited. This is the vanishing point traveler, a paradox about the erasure of existence, not because of failure, but because of completion. A traveler whose mission, once fulfilled, causes them to be unmade, not in death, but in absence. Their influence remains, but their presence is removed. The logic is brutal. If their work altered time in a way that made their own actions unnecessary, then their trip no longer needs to occur. And if it doesn't need to occur, then it never happened. And if it never happened, they never existed in your timeline at all. But here's where it gets stranger. You still feel something missing, a shape in your memory that refuses to fully dissolve. A person-shaped hole that aches in silence. You can't recall their face, but you remember meaning, emotion. You remember the weight of their presence without the image of their form. You search old files. Footage glitches where they once stood. Notes appear without authors, messages in your own handwriting, addressed to someone whose name you can't pronounce. You try to reconstruct them from the scraps, but the more you try, the faster the trail decays. Some believe this is a failsafe of time. Any self-erasing event must not leave a trace. The timeline corrects for paradoxes by retroactively sanitizing its own interference. The traveler's reward for fixing the world is to disappear from it completely. But something resists. Because the human mind isn't so easy to rewrite. We hold on to absences. We name them with silence. We carry the shape of someone even when the name is gone. So when you wake at 3 a.m. with tears and don't know why, when you reach for someone you've never met, when you swear a voice once said your name with love and urgency, you've heard the echo of someone who was never here, but still changed everything. The endless recursion trap. You sit down to write a journal entry, but before the pen touches the page, you remember you've already done this. You flip back through the pages, and there it is. Today's date, today's thoughts, already written in your own handwriting, word for word, but you haven't written it yet. At least, you think you haven't. You pause, stare. Then, trying to regain control, you write anyway. The words spill out, matching the entry exactly. You try to change one sentence, just one, but your hand shakes. Something stops you, a weight you can't explain. By the time you finish, the two entries are identical. You've just entered the endless recursion trap. This paradox isn't about loops of time, it's about loops of self, a spiral where your past and future selves feed into each other so tightly, so repeatedly, that you can't tell who originated what. Every action is mirrored, every decision reinforced, and the cycle deepens. You receive a message from yourself. It guides your next move. Later, you become the sender, but the content never changes. The message exists only because it exists. There's no moment of insight, no spark of originality, just replication. And replication becomes prison. At first, it feels stable, predictable, safe, even. A reality where everything fits because everything already has. But slowly the cracks appear. You notice details you hadn't remembered writing, phrases with no meaning, instructions with no origin. And each time you obey them, you feel yourself becoming less you and more mechanism. You're not thinking, you're following. And you don't know how long it's been. Weeks? Years? You stop trusting memory, then you stop trusting thought. Because how do you distinguish what you want from what you were told you wanted? Are your preferences real, or just artifacts left behind by your previous iteration? And the loop begins to tighten. Your decisions echo themselves. Your reactions become rehearsals. Every deviation loops back until the only path is the one that's already been walked. The recursion doesn't trap your body, it traps your agency. And as the echoes stretch forward and backward, you begin to wonder, did you ever have a first thought? Or was every idea you've ever had just a ripple from something you were always going to do? And if that's true, how do you ever stop? The timeline addiction paradox. You travel once, and it's enough to change everything. A slight nudge, a whispered warning. You save a life, or lose one, and the power rushes in like heat. You watch the ripples move. You feel the shift. Then you go back again, just once more, to fix the side effects, to correct the overcorrection, to balance what you just unbalanced, and it works. Mostly, so you go again, and again, until you're not fixing the timeline anymore, you're curating it. This is the timeline addiction paradox. At first, time travel was a tool, a means to an end, but now it's a dependency. You've tasted what it means to change things, to bend causality around your will, and the more you do it, the harder it becomes to stop. Because you start to believe that you are the only one who sees clearly, that you're not just part of history, You're its editor, its steward. And like any addiction, the line between control and compulsion blurs. You start changing things no one asked you to, fixing moments others didn't know were broken. You intervene in arguments, redirect traffic, reshape the careers of strangers, not for malice, not even for glory, just because you can. And then, inevitably, something goes wrong. A world that was vibrant grows dull. A relationship that once brought you joy now rings false. You try to remember how it used to feel, but every version you craft feels synthetic. Because the more you alter the past, the less rooted you become in any present. There's no baseline anymore. No real version of your life. Only iterations. You wake in a place you don't recognize, wearing clothes you don't remember buying, next to people who call you by a name you've used, but never quite owned. And the worst part, you know how to fix it. Just one more jump. A paradox isn't the time travel itself. It's the dependency. The way every correction creates a new dissatisfaction, every fix introduces a flaw, and with each revision, your tolerance rises. Small changes no longer satisfy. You crave bigger edits, riskier moves, complete resets. But no matter how many times you leap, there's one thing you can't fix, the part of you that needs fixing. And if you go deep enough, you'll lose track of what you were ever trying to change. You won't remember the original wound, only the endless search for a version of yourself who never needed to travel at all. The disappearance of choice. You reach a fork in the road. Left or right, pause or speak, stay or go. The moment feels like freedom. The weight of agency presses against your chest like a heartbeat. And then you freeze. Not out of fear, but recognition. Because you've stood here before, again and again. And each time you've chosen differently, you remember the consequences, the paths, the variations. Some led to joy, others to regret. But no matter which direction you took, you always ended up here again, at a different fork, in a different form, facing a choice that doesn't feel like yours anymore. This is the disappearance of choice. A paradox of repetition through awareness. The more you travel, the more you remember, and the more you remember, the less freedom you feel. Because choice only feels real when the future is unknown. When uncertainty still shimmers around your decisions like fog around headlights. But once you know how every option ends, once you've walked every path, choice becomes pantomime. You're not deciding, you're selecting, running simulations in your mind, predicting outcomes based on memories you shouldn't have. And with each new fork, the illusion grows thinner. Eventually, you don't even weigh pros and cons. You just act, because nothing surprises you. You've exhausted the novelty, seen behind the curtain. And in the absence of surprise, the will begins to hollow. You begin to ask, is this what I want? Or what I remember wanting? Does it even matter? Soon you stop choosing altogether. You wait for things to move you. Let inertia decide. You drift through scenarios like a reader rereading a book whose ending is long known. You try to trick yourself, pretend not to know. But the body remembers. The muscle of decision doesn't flex like it used to. It twitches, out of habit. Somewhere along the way, agency faded, not because it was taken from you, but because you stopped believing it mattered. Because every door has been opened, every what-if has been answered, and you're left walking through a world of options you've already consumed. And now, another fork arrives. You stand before it, not confused, not afraid, but numb. And still, somewhere inside you, a voice asks, could you choose differently now? Or was even this moment inevitable? The eternal return loop. You wake in a bed you've known 1,000 times. The same ceiling greets you. The same sun slants across the floor. You stretch, eat, walk the same street, greet the same neighbors. It all feels familiar, more than familiar. It feels worn in, inevitable, rehearsed. At first, it feels like déjà vu, Then the realization dawns. You've done this all before, not once, not 10 times, forever. This is the eternal return loop, not a time travel paradox in the conventional sense, but a philosophical trap, an idea attributed most famously to Nietzsche. If time is infinite and matter is finite, then every possible configuration must eventually repeat. Your life, with every pain, every joy, every small detail, will happen again and again. Eternal recurrence isn't about changing timelines or correcting mistakes. It's about the exact repetition of all things. No edits, no branching paths, just perfect duplication playing out on an infinite reel. And the paradox: if this life is doomed to repeat forever, what does that do to your choices, to meaning, to morality? Would you live differently, knowing that every decision echoes into eternity, not through impact, but through repetition? Would you avoid cruelty if you knew you'd be forced to deliver it again, endlessly? Or would you lean into pleasure, because every joy will be relived? But the deeper horror lies in the symmetry. The tragedies return too. The losses, the betrayals, the humiliations. You're not just trapped in a loop of your own making. You're a passenger on a track that offers no escape, no closure, and no forgetting. And unlike other loops, you don't remember each cycle in real time. You awaken each time as if it were new, only for a faint echo to remind you it's not. A scent, a phrase, a look from someone that stirs the unplaceable memory of forever. Some argue that eternal return is liberating. If this life is the one you'll live eternally, then live it so well that you choose it again. But the weight of that responsibility is immense, because even your smallest act will be yours, eternally. And if your days are filled with regret, you won't just live them once, you'll relive them forever. So you ask yourself, not what you should do next, but what you would be willing to do if this was the moment you had to repeat for all of time. Because in this loop, the question isn't how to escape. It's how to live, knowing you never will. The quantum suicide experiment. You sit in a sealed room, facing a machine. It's simple in appearance. Just a trigger, a detector, and a device connected to your heartbeat. You flip a switch. Inside the machine, a quantum particle is measured. If it spins one way, nothing happens. If it spins the other, the device fires. Instantly. You pull the trigger. You live. You reset it. Pull again. Still alive. Again. Again. In theory, the odds should catch up to you. But they don't. You keep surviving, and a strange certainty begins to settle in. Not that the machine is broken, but that you're becoming unkillable. This is the quantum suicide experiment, a thought experiment rooted in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Every quantum event splits reality into multiple outcomes. In one, you die. In another, you survive. But in each iteration, your consciousness can only experience the branch in which you continue to exist. From your perspective, you never die. It's not immortality in the traditional sense. Your body still fails in most universes. Your family grieves. Your story ends. But not for you. For you, the path keeps branching into survival, always, inevitably. And with that realization, a new question arises. What does it mean to live in a reality that is constantly edited around your awareness? To exist only in the threads where you survive, while infinite versions of you end in silence? The experiment exposes the divide between observation and experience. It forces you to consider that your continued life is not proof of safety, but of selection. You are the residue of improbable luck, the collapsing wave of a quantum coin flip that always lands on its edge. But the deeper paradox is psychological. Because what begins as awe slowly curdles into dread. You begin to test other limits. You push boundaries, believing, perhaps rightly, that you can't truly fail. But with every trial, something inside you erodes. Not from pain, but from certainty. The growing, unbearable weight that no matter what you do, you will keep living. that even the worst outcome will pass you by, leaving only the pain and the memory of what could have been. And eventually you wonder, what kind of existence is that? One where suffering accumulates but never ends, where every loss happens somewhere, but you are cursed to survive all of them. And when survival is no longer miraculous but mechanical, what meaning does it carry? Because in the quantum gamble, you may win every time, but the cost of winning is being the only version of yourself left to bear it. The reversed entropy illusion. You spill a glass of water. It splashes across the floor, soaking into the carpet, spreading outward in chaotic patterns. You stare at the mess, and for a moment you imagine it running in reverse. The droplets crawl inward. The liquid lifts from the fibers, gathers into the glass, and settles perfectly still, unbroken, undisturbed, as if nothing ever happened. But of course, that's not how reality works. Or is it? This is the reversed entropy illusion. In physics, entropy is a measure of disorder. Systems naturally evolve from low entropy, structured, organized states to high entropy, randomness, and chaos. This is the arrow of time. The reason you remember the past but not the future. The reason we age, break, and fade. But some theoretical frameworks suggest that entropy is only directional because of our perception. That time itself might not be inherently one way, but that our minds are structured to experience it as such. Our memories, our causality, our psychology, they're all built upon the illusion that entropy increases. What if that's not the case? What if entropy is balanced on both sides of a central moment, and we only experience one half of it? You'd wake each day thinking yesterday caused today, when in reality, both are anchored in something deeper, something symmetrical. You wouldn't notice the reversal because your perception, your memory would be calibrated to make it feel forward. You'd be building the illusion from inside the illusion. Some cosmological models propose that after the Big Bang, entropy rose outward in both directions. In one branch of time, stars formed, life evolved, civilizations rose. In the other, the same occurred, but with reversed causality. For the beings in that timeline, the past would feel just as fixed, just as irreversible. But if this is true, then time travel might not be the act of moving forward or backward, but simply switching sides. A jump across entropy's mirror. And the paradox. If entropy can be reversed, then so can everything built upon it. Your identity, your decisions, your morality. The core of who you are may be nothing more than an artifact of directional flow. And if that flow is ever broken, if the illusion slips, you might find yourself remembering tomorrow instead of yesterday, crying over a grief that hasn't yet happened, loving someone for reasons you haven't discovered. And one day, you might witness something impossible. A shattered glass reassembling, a death undone, a life rewinding. And you'll ask, did it truly reverse? Or did it always move that way, and you've only just learned to see it? The past influenced by the future. You make a decision today, seemingly random. You take a walk instead of calling a friend. You choose coffee over tea. You cross a street you don't usually cross. And something clicks into place. A coincidence, a meeting, a pattern you couldn't have planned. And as the day unfolds, you begin to wonder, did that decision really begin today? Or was it set in motion by something that hadn't happened yet? This is the paradox of the past, influenced by the future. A troubling reversal of cause and effect, rooted in the strange architecture of time itself. While we tend to think of time as a river flowing in one direction, from past to present to future, some interpretations of quantum physics suggest that causality may not be so rigid. In the phenomenon known as retrocausality, future events influence present outcomes. In quantum experiments, particles behave differently based on measurements that haven't yet occurred. It's not just prediction, it's participation. The future reaches back, and if it happens at the microscopic level, what stops it from scaling up? The implications are enormous. What if the reasons you acted a certain way weren't rooted in your past, your traumas, your habits, your upbringing, but in a future that needed you to act that way? What if the spark of an idea, the surge of inspiration, the sudden turn in a conversation was guided, not by memory, but by what was yet to come? To you, it feels like intuition. But what if it's feedback from a moment that hasn't happened yet? Some philosophers argue that time may be less like a line and more like a web, tensile and alive, with strands vibrating forward and backward, and that certain decisions, especially meaningful ones, don't emerge from the past at all. They are pulled into the present by gravity from the future. The paradox lies in recognition. Because if you suspect the future is shaping your now, it becomes harder to act authentically. Every thought feels contaminated. Every motive suspect. Are you pursuing a desire or fulfilling a script? But perhaps this isn't a loss of freedom. Perhaps it's something deeper. Not destiny, not design, but resonance. A kind of echo, a pull from the version of you that already knows where you're going and is trying gently to lead you there. Not to limit you, but to remind you that time may not move in one direction, and that the future, far from being a blank page, may already be writing its way back to meet you. The Schrödinger time entanglement. A physicist runs a thought experiment, and you are its subject. You step into a chamber, one designed not to trap you, but to split your experience. Inside, a quantum event will occur, something undecided. Until it is observed, it will remain in a state of superposition. But unlike the famous cat in Schrödinger's box, this time, it isn't your life that's uncertain. It's your timeline. This is Schrödinger time entanglement, a paradox where your future and past become entangled, suspended in a shared uncertainty, each dependent on the other to finalize their reality. Inside the chamber, a particle spins. Until it is measured, it is both spin up and spin down. In one version of time, you go on to change the world. In another, you disappear into obscurity. Both futures exist. But the twist, which one becomes real, depends not just on the outcome, but on the measurement of a particle in your future, not your present. Your life is waiting on a quantum result that hasn't happened yet. And worse, once it's measured, it doesn't just determine your fate, it rewrites your past. In this paradox, causality isn't just reversed, it's circular. The state of your timeline feeds backward, altering the moments you thought were solid. A conversation from a decade ago now echoes differently. A decision that once felt random gains weight or vanishes entirely. You recall a memory that no longer makes sense, but you can't prove it changed, only that you did. Physicists sometimes speak of entangled particles, twins, split across distance, their states linked instantaneously. But this is entanglement across time. A future and a past, bound together by a moment that hasn't yet collapsed into fact. The implications are vast. Your sense of continuity becomes fragile. Your autobiography feels like a draft being revised in real time. What you did, what you wanted, even who you loved, may be fluctuating in the quantum haze of what will be. And yet, you go on living. Because you must. You drink your coffee. You make your calls. You mourn losses and celebrate wins. But deep down, a quiet awareness settles in. You might not be the first version of you to live this moment. You might not be the last. And as the particle spins, unseen, unresolved, your entire life balances on the edge of its collapse, waiting for time itself to choose your story. The time split experiment. A man agrees to be part of a scientific test. He's told that at precisely noon, he will be split, not physically but temporally. Two identical versions of himself will branch off into two different timelines, each unaware of the other. He is promised that neither will feel the split. To both, life will continue as normal. At noon, the clock strikes, and nothing seems to happen. He goes home, eats dinner, goes to bed, and yet as he lies awake, something begins to feel wrong. It's not that he feels different. It's that he can't shake the sense that another version of him is living a life just out of view. This is the time split experiment. Not a paradox of time loops or causal violations, but of branching identity and subjective fracture. It posits a terrifyingly quiet kind of temporal disruption, one that doesn't break time, but duplicates it, a clean cut down the center of now. In one branch, he gets the job. In another, he doesn't. In one, he meets someone who changes his life. In another, he never leaves the house that day. The divergence is microscopic at first, harmless, but over time, the difference becomes a chasm. And the question emerges, which version is real? From the outside, both are valid. Both are coherent. But from the inside, each man begins to feel the subtle weight of the other, a life unlived, a road unwalked. He begins to dream of things he never did, to mourn people he never lost, to love people he's never met. And stranger still, sometimes he feels like the wrong one. Like the thread he's following isn't the one that was meant to continue. That somewhere, the other version is living a truer path, one that flows more smoothly, fits more cleanly. He begins to question his instincts. His desires, are they his own, or borrowed echoes from the self that split and kept the better script? The paradox is not in the duplication, but in the erosion, the quiet seepage between selves, a bleed-through of memory and possibility. Like two radio stations playing over one another, and you no longer know which one is you. Eventually, he stops trying to distinguish the paths. He just listens. To the fragments, the impressions, the ghosts of choices made by someone who looks like him, sounds like him, but moves with more purpose. Someone whose life fits like a key in a lock. And in that recognition, he faces the quiet horror that he might be the byproduct, not the original, not the real, just the other timeline. The frozen moment dilemma. You blink, and suddenly, everything stops. The air stills mid-motion. Leaves are suspended in the breeze. A fly hovers, unmoving, its wings caught in a blur. People pause mid-step, mid-breath, mid-thought. Time has halted, perfectly. Except for you. You move, you breathe, you walk through a world frozen in a single frame of reality. But what unnerves you isn't the stillness, it's the awareness that you don't know how long it's been this way. This is the frozen moment dilemma. A paradox where time stops for everyone and everything except one conscious observer. There is no countdown, no ticking clock, only the eerie suspension of all motion, leaving you adrift in a world of statues. At first, it feels like a gift. You read without distraction, explore abandoned streets, slip unnoticed into places you were never meant to see. But the silence thickens, the novelty fades, and the weight of being the only moving mind begins to settle. You can't speak to anyone. You can't wake them. They don't blink, don't breathe. You touch a shoulder. It's warm, but lifeless. You whisper into ears, shout in empty halls, cry at the feet of the frozen. No answer. You begin to wonder, has time truly stopped? Or have you slipped out of sync? And worse, what if this isn't temporary? The dilemma deepens. You realize your actions still leave marks. A coffee cup tipped, a door left open, a photograph moved slightly on a desk. If time resumes, will anyone notice these changes? Will they feel the presence of someone who walked among them without consent? The ethics twist around you. If no one sees your choices, do they still matter? If you help someone fix their falling book, move them from harm's way, have you done good? If you cause harm, shift things for your benefit, rearrange fates like furniture, have you committed a crime? Time holds no judgment here. Only you do. And in the stillness, another fear emerges. What if this frozen moment isn't a pause in time, but your eternity? What if this is your afterlife, awake in a single breath forever? You begin to search for signs. A crack in the stillness, a flicker, a blink. anything. But the world holds steady, and you, the last witness of time, are left to wonder. If a moment never ends, is it still just a moment, or has it become the only reality there is? The instant karma loop. You lie. Instantly you trip. You steal. The next moment, your wallet is gone. You lash out at someone, and your voice catches in your throat, silenced by a sudden cough. It's subtle at first. These tiny punishments, quick ripples after each misdeed. But soon, the pattern becomes undeniable. Every selfish act is met with immediate consequence, not hours or days later. Seconds, cause and effect are bound so tightly that they seem fused. This is the instant karma loop, a paradox where the universe no longer delays its judgments. Instead, it operates with immediate feedback, turning morality into a machine. You act, and the world responds, not with abstract guilt, but with measurable retaliation or reward. You help a stranger and feel warmth spread through your chest. You speak truthfully, and things seem to go your way. But every cruel word, every petty impulse returns like a boomerang before you've even stepped away. At first, it feels just fair, even comforting, a world where good is rewarded and harm is corrected. But over time, something begins to change in you. You stop acting from principle. You begin to act for response. Goodness becomes a strategy. Honesty becomes currency. Every gesture, every word is filtered through the calculation of consequence, and slowly, imperceptibly, your inner compass is replaced by a ledger. You begin to feel trapped, not by punishment, but by predictability. You lose the freedom to make mistakes, to stumble, to explore the moral gray. Even small acts of mischief carry a cost you can't afford. Eventually, your world grows rigid. Every interaction, a test. Every feeling, a risk. And worst of all, you start to see others not as people, but as variables. Potential pain, potential reward. The paradox tightens, because what began as justice has become compulsion, a feedback loop where ethics aren't chosen, but coerced. And you start to ask, if I only do good because I fear immediate harm, am I really good at all? Or have I become nothing more than a creature trained by time's reflexes? And deeper still, what happens if you try to escape? Lie without flinching, steal without shame. Would the universe let you go, or would it escalate its corrections, grow harsher, louder, more invasive, until you're broken back into shape? You begin to feel it. The invisible eye, the ever-present scale. And one day you wonder, was this justice or just another prison? The reverse aging paradox. You wake up one morning and notice something strange. Your hands look younger. The lines near your eyes are fading. The stiffness in your joints has softened. You chalk it up to rest, hydration, maybe a trick of the light. But each day, the changes continue. Your hair thickens, scars vanish, teeth grow whiter, muscles firmer. You gain not strength, but youth. The days pass, but your years seem to slip backward. This is the reverse aging paradox. At first, it feels like a miracle. You're not just avoiding death, you're undoing time. Friends marvel. Doctors are baffled. You feel better than ever. Until better starts to mean smaller. You regress to your 20s, then your teens. Your thoughts grow hazy, emotions sharpen, your body shrinks, your worldview narrows. Maturity drains like sand through an hourglass, and it becomes clear you are aging in reverse, not metaphorically, literally. And you can't stop it. You lose your driver's license, your independence, your ability to sign a lease, make decisions, explain what's happening. You are becoming a child with the memories of an adult. At first, because those memories don't last. As your body resets, your brain begins to rewire. Knowledge fades. Skills slip. Names grow distant. Eventually, language itself starts to break down, and the people around you, they stop asking questions. They see a child, a toddler, a baby, and when you scream, it comes out in cries. And then, you forget why you're screaming. The paradox isn't just about aging, it's about identity unraveling in reverse. About watching your own agency dissolve, knowing it's coming, helpless to halt it. You're not just dying, you're disappearing from the front, a vanishing act that plays backward. What's more disturbing is the way time treats you. Indifferently. There is no grand revelation, no redemption arc, just a slow return to a state before selfhood, before memory, before you. You wonder what caused it. A ripple in time? A punishment? A natural anomaly? But even that question begins to feel too large for your shrinking mind. And one day, someone picks you up. They hold you close, rock you gently. You no longer understand the words they whisper. But you feel the warmth, the closeness, the illusion of safety. And you now barely aware don't know that just days from now your body will no longer support even breath. And in a cruel symmetry, you'll end as you began, not in death, but in infancy. Not in silence, but in cries no longer your own. The paradox of the time tourist. You see them on a bench in a city they shouldn't know, perfectly at ease, camera in hand, smiling at the skyline like it's already a memory. They speak your language, but not quite. Their clothes are close to familiar, modern, but slightly off. A cut here, a fabric there. Something one step ahead. They seem to know things. Laugh at jokes that haven't yet become common. Comment on news that hasn't yet broken. And when asked where they're from, their answer is always vague. Not from around here. This is the paradox of the time tourist. A person out of time, not trapped or lost, but visiting, observing, quietly collecting moments. And the paradox isn't that they're here, it's that their very presence begins to change things. They snap a photo of a building that wasn't special. Until now, a crowd gathers. Soon, it's a landmark. They mention a restaurant. Within weeks, it's overrun. They suggest an idea, half in jest, and years later, it's an industry. Their interest alters the arc. And as they move through your world, history begins to bend toward their presence. The problem? They never claim to want influence. They're just tourists. Yet every action they take echoes forward. They observe with curiosity, but their gaze reshapes the world. Not through intention, but through inevitability. Because attention, especially from the future, acts like gravity. It pulls significance into things that were once mundane. Eventually you begin to wonder, is this their first visit? Or are they returning to witness the impact they've already made? Do they know what they're doing? Or are you simply one timeline among many, one shaped by their quiet passage? Worse still, what if you've become part of the tour? They speak with you, ask questions, seem fascinated by your life, but you begin to suspect that you're not a person to them. You're a story, a feature in a world already archived, and in their smile, there's something soft and sorrowful, as if they already know what happens next. Eventually they vanish. No goodbyes, no trace. Just a timestamp in a photo, a signature in a guest book, a comment in passing that now haunts you with precision. And you're left staring at your life, wondering how much of it was yours. And how much of it was chosen because someone from the future happened to look your way. You try to forget. But something about their presence won't let you. As if their memory is still folding the pages of time from the other side. The shadow self from tomorrow. You wake up with a thought that doesn't feel like yours. It's familiar, but not remembered. A sentence you've never spoken forms in your mouth. An urge, unprompted, drives you to check a place you never visit, and waiting there exactly where your hand lands is a key, one you didn't know you needed. At first you chalk it up to instinct. But then it happens again. You avoid a street corner moments before a crash. You speak the perfect words in a conversation you didn't prepare for. You dream of a stranger, and days later, they walk into your life. Not exactly as you saw them, but close enough. And behind it all, something watches. Not a ghost, not a god. A version of you from tomorrow. This is the shadow self from tomorrow. An identity leak across the membrane of time. Not full memory, not total recall, but impressions, fragments. As if the next version of you has found a way to whisper back through the cracks. But the paradox isn't just that tomorrow you exists. It's that they're shaping who you are today. Your decisions feel more guided, your reactions more rehearsed. You become eerily good at predicting outcomes, sidestepping traps, saying what needs to be said. But as the influence grows stronger, something else begins to shift. You no longer know which thoughts are yours. Was that impulse born in this moment or fed to you from the future? Are you solving problems or acting on a script handed down by a self that already knows how things end? Worse, the guidance starts to feel more like nudging, then pushing, then pulling. You take actions that feel wrong, but which lead to results that are strangely right. You begin to trust the feeling more than your logic. You follow it blindly. Until one day, you catch your reflection and something flickers. For a moment, the person looking back seems older, smarter, more tired. A face worn by knowledge you don't yet possess. And behind their eyes, a question. Are they guiding you? Or are they replacing you? Because if tomorrow you can influence today, how long before they erase the need for today you entirely? How long before you become the shadow? Just a vessel, a puppet, a placeholder to keep the loop alive. You close your eyes, searching for silence, but the thoughts keep coming, and they do not feel like yours. The paradox of perfect timing. You catch the bus the instant it arrives. You answer a call the moment it rings. You walk into a bookstore, and the exact book you didn't know you were looking for is sitting face out at eye level. At first it feels like luck, but then it happens again and again, not just for you, but for someone else too. A stranger who always seems to be in the right place, at the right moment, with exactly the right words. They speak into silences you didn't know needed filling. They interrupt your thoughts with uncanny precision. Their timing is flawless. This is the paradox of perfect timing. It's not about foresight or intuition. It's not about chance. It's about a deeper thread, one that seems to pull certain people along a rhythm the rest of us can't hear. A beat beneath the surface of time that guides them not toward outcomes but toward moments, those invisible hinges where futures pivot quietly. And the paradox isn't that they're always right. It's that they never miss. They arrive before the elevator doors close. They speak just as the silence grows unbearable. They hit send the moment you're about to reply, not because they know, but because they match. You begin to wonder, is their life orchestrated? Are they dancing to a hidden metronome that synchronizes them with the most pivotal instance of unfolding reality? And if so, is it a blessing? Because the burden of perfect timing is that it doesn't allow deviation. You can't slow down, can't pause, can't choose to sit this one out. You are always being pulled into alignment. Again and again, your life becomes choreography. And even joy feels like performance. The danger lies in thinking it's a gift. Because once you realize your presence is timed, not by choice but by necessity, you stop feeling like an agent. You start feeling like a mechanism, a precision gear in a clock that only runs if you turn exactly when you're meant to. You try to resist, miss the moment on purpose, stay silent a second too long. But everything unravels. A crash that shouldn't have happened. A missed glance that ends a connection. A wrong word that triggers a spiral. And just like that, you understand. Perfect timing wasn't elevating you. It was containing you. You were never choosing the moment. You were placed in it. And as the stranger smiles once more and vanishes into a crowd, you're left wondering, was their timing perfect? Or was yours just rehearsed? The Retrocausality Enigma. You flip a switch. and an event from yesterday changes, and yet you remember it. Not your memory of it, not your interpretation. The actual event, a vase that was broken, is now intact. A conversation that ended in anger never happened. A decision you regret simply no longer exists. There's no evidence it ever did. This is the retrocausality enigma, a paradox where cause and effect run in reverse, where the present reaches backward, shaping the past to fit the current outcome, where history is no longer the fixed foundation of the now but its plastic reflection. In quantum theory, there are experiments, double-slit variations, delayed choice protocols that hint at this possibility. Particles seem to behave based on how they will be measured in the future, not how they were prepared in the past. It defies intuition. It forces physicists to ask, is the timeline truly anchored from beginning to end, or is it a negotiation between both? In this enigma, retrocausality doesn't just affect electrons, it touches lives. A musician writes a melody they swear they heard in a dream. Decades later, it's discovered that the song was first recorded long after they composed it, but only because someone in the future was inspired by that same piece and brought it back. A loop with no origin. A gift from tomorrow. A scientist solves a problem they never consciously worked on, only to find a future journal, encrypted, mislabeled, overlooked, where the solution was already described. They wrote it years from now, under different circumstances, and somehow it found its way back. But these gifts come with a cost. If the future shapes the past, then free will begins to erode. Your choices might not be your own, but responses to events that haven't yet occurred. You think you're following a hunch, but you're obeying a ripple. And when something terrible happens, a tragedy, a betrayal, a loss, your first instinct is no longer to ask why, but from where. Not what led to this, but what in the future demanded it. Because maybe the past didn't build this moment. Maybe this moment reached back and built the past around it. You try to resist, make choices that feel random, chaotic, untraceable. But the more you fight it, the more the timeline bends, smooths, adjusts to keep coherence, as if it won't allow divergence, as if the future already happened, and it's just waiting for the past to comply. And now, every quiet instinct, every forgotten coincidence, every déjà vu feels like a signal, not from your memory, but from your destiny. A future truth pressing backward, rewriting the script from the final page. The truth that arrived too early. A woman wakes from a dream with a theory. Not a vague idea, but something crystalline, precise, elegant, terrifyingly complete. A mathematical framework, a new law of motion, a map of something deeper than atoms. She can't explain where it came from, only that it feels true. She writes it down, builds on it, tests it. Others dismiss her. Too strange, they say. Too far ahead. No data, no context. But she keeps going, certain the truth doesn't care about readiness. This is the paradox of the truth that arrived too early. It haunts science, art, and history. A theory, an invention, a warning, delivered before the world is willing to understand it. When received too soon, truth doesn't illuminate, it destabilizes. The woman publishes her findings. The formulas work, her predictions hold. But the field rejects her, not because she's wrong, because the truth doesn't fit the current scaffolding. There are no terms for it yet, no experiments prepared to verify it. The tools don't exist, the paradigms would need to bend, and no one wants to be first. Instead, she's labeled eccentric, dismissed, her ideas archived, footnoted, or worse, forgotten. And the tragedy unfolds. A truth can be lost, not because it is hidden, but because it is seen too soon. Time, it seems, is not neutral. Some truths require the right moment to be accepted. The right tragedy, the right crisis, the right cultural fatigue. Until then, they linger in limbo, visible only to those cursed with premature vision. and the paradox deepens. Because sometimes the arrival of early truth doesn't just go unheeded, it actively prevents itself from being embraced. It burns too bright, too fast. It inoculates people against it. They remember the failed prediction, the awkward unveiling, the fringe reputation. So when the truth resurfaces later, perfectly timed, fully prepared, it must first climb out of the hole its earlier self was buried in. History is full of these ghosts. Theories laughed at before becoming law. Artists ignored until centuries later. Warnings scorned until their accuracy turned prophetic. The early truth-teller becomes a myth or a cautionary tale. And all the while the question lingers, was the truth truly early, or were we just late? Because sometimes the only thing more dangerous than ignorance is knowledge we're not yet ready to bear. The delayed discovery trap. You find an old notebook in a secondhand shop. It's filled with formulas, diagrams, theories that seem impossible. You flip through its pages and realize it contains knowledge that hasn't yet been discovered. Scientific breakthroughs, technological blueprints, even philosophical insights that challenge the most advanced thinkers of your time. At first you believe it's fiction, a clever fabrication. But as the years pass, you begin to see these ideas appear in the real world, one by one. Each innovation once thought impossible, now surfacing in academic journals and research papers, exactly as described in the notebook. You check the handwriting again. It's yours. This is the delayed discovery trap, a paradox in which knowledge arrives before its time, but only because it has already been discovered in the future. You didn't create the ideas. You found them, but your discovery of them causes their reemergence. You become the transmitter, not the origin. So where did the knowledge truly begin? You didn't invent it. You only copied what already existed, but in the future, others cite you as the origin. The notebooks, the insights, they all trace back to you, and yet your own source was never original. It was recursive. You've become the loop. The trap deepens, because now you begin to use the notebook. You publish, you teach, you advance. Not through inspiration, but through transcription. And each time you do, the world moves closer to aligning with the pages in your hands. You are shaping reality with echoes from a future that may not have happened yet. And then a thought strikes you. What if this notebook was left for you? What if someone in the future, maybe even you, deliberately placed it in your path to ensure a certain timeline? One where these ideas were preserved, protected, and propagated by a person naive enough to think they were the first to read them. You're no longer asking how it works. You're asking why. Why you? Why now? And what does it mean to build a world on ideas you never truly understood, only repeated? Worse yet, what if the ideas are wrong? What if one of the theories is flawed, but still becomes real because you spread it? What if this entire reality is built not on truth, but on repetition? Belief without origin? You want to stop, but the world is already changing. And the next page in the notebook describes tomorrow. A tomorrow that now must happen, because you've read it. And the more you try to resist, the more you realize the truth. The trap wasn't the discovery. It was the delay. Because once you see the future, you can't unknow it. You can only become the one who brings it into being. The misremembered future. You're walking down a street you've never seen, in a city you've never visited, but every step feels familiar. You pause at an intersection and know, instinctively, that the bakery on the corner will have red awnings, that the barista will greet you with a smile, that the bell above the door will ring twice when you enter. You walk in, and it happens exactly as you expected. But you've never been here before. This is the misremembered future, a paradox that suggests not all memory is rooted in the past, that some memories, vivid, detailed, emotional, may actually originate from what has not yet occurred, not premonition, not foresight, but the unsettling feeling that your future has already happened and you're just catching up. It starts small. You remember a song before you've heard it. You recognize someone moments before you meet. You solve a problem without recalling the process of learning how. These aren't predictions. They're memories, and they feel as solid as any childhood moment. At first, you assume it's coincidence, a trick of pattern recognition, your brain making false connections. But the more it happens, the harder it is to explain away. The details are too sharp, the timing too perfect. And the more you trust it, the more it starts to shape your decisions. You walk toward places you've already been. You speak words you haven't planned. You avoid accidents you never saw coming. And soon, you stop questioning it. You lean in. But with that trust comes danger. Because if your memory contains the future, then so might your fear. You begin to dread things that haven't happened yet, because you remember them. A conversation that hasn't gone wrong, but feels like it already did. A betrayal that leaves no scar, but weighs on your chest. A love that breaks your heart long before it's ever confessed. And you ask, if I recall it, does that mean it must happen? The paradox intensifies when you try to change the memory. You attempt to reroute your choices, say something different, go a new way, but the feeling persists, as if the timeline is dragging you back into alignment. You forget the change and slip into the version you always remembered. Soon, the distinction between memory and prophecy begins to blur. Your mind becomes a feedback loop, remembering futures that may only exist because you believe in them. And the question you once asked in passing now becomes terrifying. Are these memories real? Or are they just footprints left behind by a version of you who's already lived everything and is now whispering back through time? If so, are you making your future? Or just playing it out again, scene by scene, from a script you can't remember writing? The illusion of original thought. You wake in the middle of the night with an idea. It arrives like a flash, brilliant, complete, almost divine in clarity. You reach for your notebook or your phone, and you write it down. Not just the shape of it, but the phrasing. The flow. It feels like something new, something no one has ever thought in quite the same way before. You go back to sleep with a strange sense of pride, like you've touched the edge of something meaningful. But the next morning, curiosity flickers. You search your idea, type the phrase into a browser, and there it is. Someone else said it first, years ago, word for word. And suddenly, your idea no longer feels like it belongs to you at all. This is the illusion of original thought, a paradox that stretches across time and mind. We often imagine ideas as sparks, self-generated, fresh, and singular. But what if most of them aren't? What if every thought you've ever had was seeded by fragments, absorbed unconsciously over a lifetime, snippets of conversation, flashes of text, scenes from forgotten films, childhood echoes lodged deep in the folds of memory? You believe you're the thinker, but maybe you're just the mirror. Some neuroscientists call this cryptomnesia, the phenomenon of remembering something without realizing it's a memory. You think it's yours, but it's borrowed, repurposed, a remix of past impressions. In that sense, originality becomes foggy. What separates a new idea from an inherited one? Is it timing, context, the illusion that no one else is having it at the same moment? Now add time travel to the mix. Imagine you write a book. Decades later, a time traveler reads it, goes back, and tells your younger self the key idea. Inspired, you grow up to write the book. The loop closes. The thought has no origin, just infinite echo. Who authored it? You or the loop? And if time isn't linear, if ideas float across it like signals received more than invented, how many of your thoughts are truly yours? And how many are just part of a larger pattern, moving through minds like weather across skies? You begin to feel uneasy. You remember moments of inspiration that felt too smooth, phrases that seemed to write themselves. Now you wonder if those words weren't channeled from the ether of culture and history, not stolen, not plagiarized, but passively absorbed. And that begs a deeper question. If there are no original thoughts, only old ones resurfacing in new vessels, then what is identity? What part of you is truly you? Maybe you're not the source. Maybe you're the conduit, a place through which memory and language pass, and in rare moments, align. The thought feels familiar, which is the point. The one-way time mirror. They tell you it's not a portal, not a machine, not a wormhole or a doorway. It's a mirror, but it doesn't reflect you. When you stand in front of it, the surface shimmers, revealing a scene, your world. Yes, but not your now. It shows the future, 30 years forward, your city, your street, your own home. You can see who lives there, what they wear, what the world has become. You can't speak to it. You can't touch it. It doesn't change based on your actions, but every day it shows you a glimpse of what's to come. This is the one-way time mirror, and the paradox isn't what you see, it's what you do with what you see. At first, it's awe, cities reshaped, diseases cured, people gone, technology transformed. You study, take notes, try to understand. But then comes the temptation. You see yourself, older, richer, or perhaps broken, alone. You try to change your present to match what you like or avoid what you fear. You take the job, avoid the trip, end the relationship. You nudge and reshape your life, hoping the mirror will approve. Yet it doesn't respond. It keeps showing the same future. So you push harder. You chase the version of yourself you see, or flee from them. You adopt their clothes, their mannerisms, their choices, or you do the opposite, hoping to fracture the timeline and escape the outcome. But still, the mirror holds steady. Eventually, a theory forms: the mirror isn't showing the future that will be, only the future that was already seen. The act of watching locks it in. You didn't create that outcome. You inherited it the moment you observed it. And worse still, your very attempt to change it may have been what caused it. You begin to unravel. If seeing the future makes it fixed, then free will becomes theater, a loop of reactions to knowledge you were never meant to have. You stop trusting your motives. Every action feels contaminated. Are you choosing or performing? And the mirror remains. Silent, unmoving, inevitable. Some days you swear it's changed. The background shifted, a name missing, but when you try to confirm it, you can't be sure. Memory bends too easily around certainty. Eventually, people begin to fear the mirror. They cover it, avoid it. Others obsess, spend every waking moment staring into the possible, looking for signs that their lives matter, that their choices still ripple. But you come less often now. Because you've begun to realize the terrible truth. It was never a mirror for you. It was a mirror of you. A story being told backward, one image at a time. And now that it's been seen, there's no telling who or what is still watching. The time cop paradox. Imagine this. You dedicate your life to protecting time. Not ideas, not borders, but the timeline itself. Your mission is simple in theory: prevent unauthorized alterations, track down those who tamper, correct mistakes, keep the past from unraveling the present. You are a time enforcer, a guardian of the chronology, a so-called time cop. But there's a catch. In order to enforce the rules of time, you must break them. This is the time cop paradox. To prevent temporal crimes, you must commit temporal crimes. You must observe events before they happen, intervene in moments you were never meant to witness, erase anomalies that ironically wouldn't exist if not for your arrival. The paradox becomes apparent the longer you operate. You intercept a rogue traveler who prevents a war, but by stopping them, the war happens again. You undo a loop that stabilized a population. You fix one thing, and in doing so, you become the cause of another fracture. You intervene to protect history, and slowly become the reason history needs protecting. The more you interfere, the more interference you need to manage. At some point, you stop asking, "Is this working?" and start wondering, "Am I the only thing holding this version of time together?" Worse still, you begin to question motive. Was the traveler you stopped really a criminal, or just someone attempting to repair a world you've already broken? You don't know. You never did. All you have are orders from a future that may already be corrupted. Because the time cop doesn't act from knowledge. They act from protocol. But protocols are written by outcomes. By a version of history that already includes your interventions. Your actions aren't outside the loop. They're woven into it, and every move you make becomes a fixed point that someone else must one day correct. Soon you discover that there are others, enforcers like you, from timelines that no longer exist, working to preserve chronologies you've never heard of. You fight them. You ally with them. You lose track of which version of reality you're supposed to protect. And eventually, you encounter your own signature. A ripple from a mission long erased. A message left by yourself in a timeline you have no memory of creating. It warns you or guides you, or simply says, "Let it break." You hesitate. You've never hesitated before. Because deep down you know the truth. The only constant in the timeline is your interference. You are not the guardian of time. You are its most loyal saboteur. The long-dead messenger. You find a journal buried beneath the floorboards. Its pages are brittle. Its ink faded. The language is old, but legible. What strikes you first is the date, hundreds of years ago, and then your name, written clearly, spelled exactly. You flip through the entries. The voice is calm, lucid. The writer speaks of moments you haven't yet lived, describes decisions you've yet to make, thoughts you haven't thought. It warns of a choice, one you'll face soon, and urges caution. You feel a chill, not from fear, but recognition. This is the voice of someone who knew you intimately, impossibly, before you were born. This is the long-dead messenger. A paradox wrapped in ink and time, a transmission from a person long deceased, written in a time when you didn't exist, yet directed at you with stunning clarity. You consider forgery, coincidence, hallucination, but the details are too precise, the patterns too aligned. You are being addressed directly by a ghost with perfect foresight. So how did they know? One theory, time is a landscape, not a line. Past, present, future coexist like hills and valleys. A sensitive mind in the past might have glimpsed forward through dreams, meditation, or madness and caught your silhouette on the horizon. Another, you are not the first version of you to walk this path. The messenger is a record keeper from an earlier loop, trying to guide a better outcome. Or perhaps more disturbingly, they created the loop. What begins as curiosity morphs into weight. You feel watched, not by something present, but by something already gone. You start to see the journal as a mirror with no reflection, a one-way channel of influence. You want to respond, but you know it's too late. They're dead. Their moment is over. The only communication that exists is in your direction. And yet somehow you feel pressure to live in a way that justifies their effort, as if your life now belongs to a story someone else began. The paradox deepens when you consider the risk. What if the journal is a trap, a manipulation? The words you read plant seeds that wouldn't have grown otherwise, a prophecy that writes itself into being. Did the messenger predict your future or program it? Every word you read feels heavier. Every action suspect. You begin to question your agency. Would you be doing this now if the journal hadn't told you to be wary? Is the warning protecting you or steering you? And in that doubt, you glimpse the deeper terror, that you are not the protagonist in your own timeline. You are the effect of someone else's message, a vessel for someone else's voice. And even as you try to close the journal and walk away, part of you knows it will not stay buried. Because long after the messenger died, they are still speaking. And now that you've heard them, you are part of the message too. The mysterious letter in the drawer. You're cleaning out your desk late one night when you find it, folded neatly between old receipts and forgotten keys. It's an envelope with no stamp, no address, and your name written in a hand that's uncannily familiar, your own. Inside is a letter. The ink is smudged slightly, as if written in haste, but the words are clear. It describes something that hasn't happened yet. A warning, perhaps, a decision you're about to make, a danger you haven't sensed. The details are intimate, accurate, impossible. At first, you assume it's a prank, a note you wrote and forgot. But the more you read, the more you realize this version of you knows things no one else could, not guesses, not advice, specifics, names, feelings, even phrases you haven't yet said, but know you will. You try to trace it. There's no date, no return address, no paper you recognize. But the voice, it's yours. Older, weary, urgent. This is the paradox of the mysterious letter in the drawer. It suggests a loop of information with no clear origin, a message from the future, written to the past, in a cycle with no beginning. Who wrote the first version? When and how did it arrive here, folded, aged, already waiting before you knew to search for it? If you act on the letter's warning, you'll avoid what it predicts, but that changes your future. So what compelled your future self to write it in the first place? If the warning never becomes necessary, does the letter vanish? Or worse, do you still find it, but its contents have shifted? The paradox deepens with possibility. You try writing back. You leave the new letter in the drawer. Days pass. Weeks. Nothing. And then another note appears. In your own writing again. Only this time, it's responding to what you wrote, anticipating your reply. You begin a correspondence with yourself across time. But soon, the conversation turns uncanny. Your future self starts asking you for help, expressing doubt, confusion. You were supposed to be the one with questions, but now the voice that once guided you seems desperate, lost. You wonder what happened to me. What version of myself is sending these letters, and what timeline did they try to escape? Then one day, you open the drawer, and there's no letter, just an empty space, as if the loop has closed or broken, and a terrible silence settles in. You're left without instruction, without insight, just the echo of a voice that may never have existed. And the haunting question, did the letter change your future? Or did it simply trap you in someone else's attempt to rewrite their own? You close the drawer slowly, but you know you'll check it again. Because once you've heard from a version of yourself that shouldn't exist, you never stop listening. The collapsing reality cascade. You begin to notice it during small moments, a missing object that should be on the table, a streetlight that was always there, now gone, a conversation you're sure you had, but no one else remembers. At first you assume it's stress, a glitch of memory, maybe even lack of sleep. You dismiss it, but then it happens again and again, until the fabric of your reality begins to feel unstable. You walk through your apartment, and something is off. The clock ticks, but the numbers aren't right. You blink, and it corrects itself. A song plays on the radio, but the lyrics shift mid-verse, as if the world hasn't yet decided what it wants to say. People speak to you with perfect familiarity, yet you're certain you've never met them. This is the collapsing reality cascade. It's not a single rupture, not a time loop, not a universe swap. It's something far more insidious, the slow degradation of coherence itself. A series of micro-failures in continuity that begin to stack. At first they're background noise, glitches in the simulation if you like. But soon they become impossible to ignore. Objects fade between frames of your life. Events rewrite themselves. One morning you wake and your home is rearranged, but no one else notices. The headlines are wrong. A global event you remember vividly vanishes from the collective timeline. The paradox isn't just that reality is collapsing. It's that no one else notices. You try to hold on to what's consistent: photographs, journals, video files. But they too begin to shift. Your handwriting changes style. Videos you've recorded stutter, reword themselves. Your own voice distorts in playback, no longer echoing who you are. And what's worse is the cascade. It's not random. It's accelerating. One change demands another, like a line of dominoes toppling through the scaffolding of time. Each correction introduces more inconsistencies. The universe tries to balance, but it's spiraling, desperately reconfiguring itself around you and failing. Eventually, you're left with only fragments. Anchors, one or two sensations that still feel real. A taste, a smell, a particular pattern of light on the wall that hasn't yet shifted. You cling to them like a castaway clings to driftwood because you're no longer sure what's true, or if anything ever was. The final horror arrives not as a scream, but a whisper. A moment of profound stillness where nothing moves because nothing is left to move. The world holds its breath. Time pauses, and for a fraction of a second, you see it clearly. The code unraveling. The scaffold dropping. The last echo of a world that can no longer remember what it was trying to be. And then, it begins again. But something's different this time. The Lost Day Conundrum. You wake up feeling disoriented, as if something is missing. The clock reads the right time. The calendar shows the right date, but your body doesn't agree. Your muscles ache like they've moved. Your mind holds fragments of memories you can't quite place, and there's an unfamiliar taste in your mouth, as if you just lived something but forgot the flavor. You check your messages. Nothing unusual. Emails are up to date. But something's off. People mention things you don't remember doing. A friend thanks you for a conversation you never had. A package arrives that you apparently ordered, yet has no recollection of picking out. Then you see it. A timestamp on your phone that doesn't match. A GPS trail leading somewhere you've never visited. A bruise on your leg, fresh and unexplained. You ask around, some remember seeing you, others don't, and a few look at you too long, as if trying to reconcile something you no longer carry. This is the Lost Day Conundrum, a paradox not of time loops or travel, but of temporal omission, a full cycle of existence, lived, spoken, recorded, but no longer accessible to the person who lived it. You didn't sleep through the day. You were active, present, tangled in events and choices. But the self you are now is out of sync with the self who lived it, as if your consciousness skipped a beat in the symphony of time and returned to find the music still playing. Some theories speak of temporal shielding, a phenomenon where memory is severed from experience to protect continuity. Others suggest it's the result of brief overlaps with adjacent timelines, where consciousness shifts between slightly altered versions of you, and one thread is sacrificed in the process. Either way, the result is the same. Your story has a missing chapter, and you're the only one who doesn't know what it said. You begin to notice the aftershocks. A shift in how others speak to you. A gut feeling that your relationships have changed. The subtle panic of reading emotions you don't remember earning or breaking. You might have betrayed someone, or forgiven someone, or confessed something you can't now retract. And the more you investigate, the deeper the uncertainty grows. Do you want to know what happened? What if it was something you can't live with, something you were never meant to carry? And what if your amnesia isn't an accident, but a mercy granted by time itself, a reset to preserve what little remains of who you were? But the questions linger. Where were you that day? Who were you with? And perhaps most disturbingly, if you lost one day, how would you ever know if you've already lost more? The looping war. At first it seemed like history was simply repeating itself. A rising power. A bold act, a counterstrike, then negotiations, silence, and the fragile breath of peace. But it never lasted. The spark reignited. The pieces moved again, and the same faces, sometimes in different roles, sometimes in mirrored positions, began to appear over and over. Each time the events unfolded with eerie similarity. The alliances, the betrayals, the language of justification, the slogans recycled with new names and new flags, the footage replayed but no one seemed to notice. This is the looping war. A paradox where time doesn't just rewind, but gets caught in a spiral, repeating a conflict with variations so minor they almost go undetected. Not a perfect circle, but an echo that deepens with each revolution. No one remembers the previous iterations in full, only the sense of having lived through something familiar, a kind of geopolitical déjà vu. Some theorists begin to notice patterns. They chart dates, speeches, weather conditions. Watching them align too closely, they predict actions with increasing precision. A treaty will break, a city will fall, an uprising will fizzle just before it sparks. Their accuracy draws suspicion. People ask, are they prophets, time travelers, or just students of a pattern that the rest refuse to see? The terrifying part is that each version feels new. The players believe they are breaking ground. Leaders speak as if their choices are unprecedented. Citizens mourn as if for the first time. And yet somewhere beneath it all is a quiet awareness. We've been here before. And then comes the deeper horror. What if the war isn't a metaphor? What if time itself is fractured here, in this conflict, and is looping because it cannot resolve, like a skipped groove in a record, like a corrupted file endlessly trying to load? A fracture in the narrative of time, and the war is the glitch. You begin to question every casualty, every peace deal. Were they ever real, or simply the latest shadow of a battle that never ends? Some factions believe they must end the loop by any means necessary. They escalate, hoping to reach a conclusion so definitive that the spiral will break. Others argue that violence itself is the anchor, that only complete disengagement, total refusal to play the game can disrupt the cycle. But no one agrees, and the war resumes. You read the morning news and feel the chill. Haven't you read this before? Each time, the names change. The uniforms shift, the technologies update, but the grief remains constant. The headlines are always the same. The looping war doesn't need memory to persist. It just needs belief. And every time we believe it's new, we wind the spiral one turn tighter. The great forgetting loop. You wake up knowing something has been erased. Not from your device, not from a page, but from your mind. You remember remembering it, but the memory itself is gone. It leaves behind a hollow shape, like a photograph long removed from its frame. A feeling lingers, that it mattered, that it changed something. But what it was, you cannot say. You search your journals. No mention. You check your calendar, your messages, blank, and yet every part of your being insists that there was something, a decision, an idea, a truth. This is the great forgetting loop, a paradox, not of action, but of absence, where the most significant moments are those that no longer exist in memory. Not because they were never there, but because something has removed them with precision. Not a blunt amnesia, but a surgical extraction. And worse still, it doesn't happen once. It happens again. You begin to track the pattern. At first, you forget a name, then a conversation, then an entire weekend feels paper-thin, like it happened to someone else. You find objects in your home that you can't explain, books you never remember reading, photos with unfamiliar faces. The loop tightens, and with each pass, you remember less. But curiously, you remember that you forgot. That's the trap. The loop isn't content to erase. It leaves the outline, the echo, the ache of a vanished truth. It ensures that you feel the loss, even if you can't trace it. And that subtle cruelty begins to alter your sense of time, of identity. You can no longer trust the completeness of your own thoughts. People speak to you with familiarity you don't reciprocate. You feel grief you can't explain. You avoid places without knowing why. And then, in flashes, brief, electric, you remember. A stranger's face that once meant everything. A promise whispered in the dark. a secret that split your life in two, and just as quickly, it slips away again, as if your mind, your very timeline, has a built-in defense mechanism, not to protect you from trauma, but to keep certain truths from becoming permanent. You begin to wonder, is the forgetting yours, or are you the echo of someone else's edited memory? What if someone, something, outside you is rewriting reality? Not the world, but the record of it. A loop of selective remembering, crafted by a force that lets you feel the presence of what it takes away, not to deceive you, but to break you slowly. And in your rare lucid moments, you fear the deepest possibility, that the most important parts of your life, the real you, are locked behind doors your own mind has been taught to ignore. And every day you wake up a little more blank, a little more prepared for forgetting again. The Vanishing Sibling Paradox. You remember them clearly. A sibling, same house, same table, childhood games, and whispered secrets under blankets. They laughed like you, fought like you, shared a bedroom and a bedtime and a bloodline. And then one day, they were just gone. Not lost to death, not moved away, not taken or hidden, gone as if they were never there. Their room is still a room, but it's not their room. Your parents don't speak of them. Old photographs show a family of 3, not 4. The chair at the dinner table has always belonged to the dog. And yet you remember. This is the Vanishing Sibling Paradox. A temporal distortion so deep and complete that it doesn't merely erase someone from the present, but from the past as well. A deletion that reaches backward, rewriting not just memory but physical evidence. The world adapts. The timeline reshapes itself. You remain, but your sibling is unmade. And you're the only one who notices. At first, you question your sanity. You scour family albums, school records, digital archives. Every trace that should be there isn't. And yet, in the quietest corners of your mind, their name lingers. Their voice echoes. Muscle memory recalls their presence, the way you used to shift on the couch to make room, the instinct to knock twice on their door. The paradox deepens when fragments begin to resurface. A forgotten drawing in the attic, a home video with a sliver of unexplained laughter just out of frame, a birthday card addressed to 2 kids, not 1, objects out of place, feelings with no source. You begin to suspect the universe didn't erase your sibling completely, it just buried the trail. And the deeper you dig, the more resistance you feel. Not from people, but from time itself. As if the world around you is smoothing over a crack, patching a narrative too fragile to allow anomalies. Friends shrug off your questions. Strangers look at you with confusion. You mention your sibling's name and people tilt their heads like you've mispronounced a common word. The paradox is more than a disappearance. It's a betrayal of chronology, a suggestion that time isn't a record, but a script being edited on the fly. That the people in your life are characters in a scene that keeps rewriting itself to preserve continuity. And you, the one who remembers, are the flaw in the system. You begin to wonder, why do you remember when no one else does? Were you meant to forget too, but slipped through the cracks? Were you preserved as a failsafe, a witness? Or maybe, you were never supposed to have a sibling at all. And everything you recall, the memories, the photos you swore existed, the laughter in the dark, wasn't erased. It was never allowed to be. Only now it's leaking back through the seams of reality. And waiting to be remembered. The forgotten origin. You sit at your desk, flipping through an old photo album. Childhood birthdays, family vacations, school portraits. You recognize the faces. You remember the moments, but something begins to gnaw at the edge of your mind. Where did it all begin? You search for the earliest image, the first trace of your existence. There's a hospital photo, a birth certificate, a name written in faded ink, but none of it feels foundational. These are labels. Evidence, not memory, not you. You try to recall your first conscious thought, your first sensory experience, your first undeniable moment of awareness, but no matter how hard you search, there's only fog, a curtain drawn over the earliest part of your story. This is the forgotten origin, a paradox not of time loops or branching futures, but of absence, of the untraceable point where you began. A hole in the timeline, not because it was erased, but because it was never clear to begin with. Science offers explanations. Neural development, cognitive emergence, the hippocampus still forming in infancy. But the explanations feel like placeholders, rational scaffolding over a void. Because even as your memories expand outward, they do so without a true center. You weren't dropped into the world fully formed, and yet you never seem to remember becoming. And that's the paradox. How can you know so much about yourself, your preferences, your values, your fears, while being unable to trace the source of any of it? You remember being 5, but not 2. You remember certain faces, but not when they first appeared. Even your sense of self, this interior voice you think of as you arrived silently, like a whisper you assumed was always there. You begin to wonder if you were ever truly conscious of your beginning at all. Maybe you grew into selfhood so gradually that no one moment claimed it. Or maybe your origin is an illusion, a retroactive construction built from narrative convenience. But deeper still is the possibility that your beginning isn't just lost to memory, but structurally unreachable, that the mind, by its nature, cannot witness its own formation, that the origin must always remain invisible, because to observe it would disrupt it, like a mirror trying to reflect itself. You ask others. They nod. They feel it too. That blank space where they should remember something, someone who stepped into consciousness for the first time. But there's only echoes, hints, the smell of a room you can't name, a lullaby with no lyrics. And the implications spiral outward. You may have been living a story without a first page. If you can't remember your own beginning, how certain are you of your continuity, of your identity, of the path that led you here? And if your origin was forgotten, or never written, or just the version that remembered waking up, how would you ever know if you were the original copy, or just the version that remembered waking up? The clock that counts backward. It hangs in your grandfather's study. Heavy, brass-framed, the kind of antique that feels older than the room itself. It ticks with perfect precision, its hands moving in slow, deliberate circles. But one day, as you glance up mid-sentence, you realize something's wrong. It's not just behind, it's going backward. At first, you think it's broken. You replace the batteries, reset the time. But every time you return, it drifts further into the past. Minutes, then hours, then days. You mention it to others, but they laugh. To them, it keeps perfect time. Only you see it unwind. This is the paradox of the clock that counts backward, a mechanism not of broken gears, but of inverted chronology. It doesn't mark where you are. It marks where you've been. And as it continues its reversal, you begin to feel something inside you respond. Because its time begins to feel like your own. You start dreaming of events that haven't happened yet, but feel eerily familiar when they do. You speak words before others say them. You recall conversations before they unfold. Your memories become unmoored, cascading out of order. It's not just déjà vu, it's preemptive nostalgia, mourning things as they begin. As the clock regresses, your days become increasingly disjointed. You wake remembering tomorrow. You argue over things that haven't yet been said. You catch yourself grieving for losses that are still days away. And soon, you begin to doubt the forward flow of time at all. Because the more you stare at the backward-moving hands, the more right they feel. It becomes a compass, not pointing north, but toward a kind of temporal gravity. A pull away from cause into consequence, from action into anticipation. And the strangest part? The further backward it turns, the more clearly you remember things that never were. You begin to see forks in your past, lives you might have lived, regrets that feel rehearsed, triumphs that ache like something you've lost. The backward time doesn't erase your history. It multiplies it. And eventually you realize the clock isn't measuring your time. You're measuring its time. Because each backward tick takes you further from the now you knew. Each reversal pulls you deeper into a version of life where outcomes precede decisions, where intention is replaced by inevitability, and where free will erodes, not through force, but through certainty. You ask yourself, what happens when it reaches zero? But the clock doesn't answer. It just keeps ticking. Backward. Always backward. Until one day you're no longer watching it. You're living by it. And time as you understood it becomes just another illusion, folded inward, unraveling, beautiful in its descent. The prisoner of the Chrono-Sphere. It begins as a marvel. A shimmering sphere, no larger than a room, suspended above the ground in a lab hidden from the world. Inside, time does not move forward, nor does it move backward. It holds completely still, a perfectly preserved moment, sealed and silent. You can see the person inside, standing mid-step, mid-breath, suspended between seconds. At first, they volunteered. A pioneer. Someone willing to test what it meant to pause time. To be untouched by aging, untouched by decay, immune to suffering and consequence. A body preserved like a painting. A life stopped before the fall. They entered the Chrono-Sphere, and they never came out. This is the paradox of the prisoner of the Chrono-Sphere. The tragedy not of time lost, but of time denied. A person frozen in a moment they chose, but not one they could escape. Outside the sphere, years pass. Scientists observe, governments speculate, journalists guess. But the subject remains locked in that same millisecond, their consciousness suspended, unaware of how long they've been gone, unaware that the world they knew has already changed beyond recognition. The dilemma emerges when the sphere's temporal boundary resists interference. No signal enters, no data escapes. They are perfectly protected and perfectly imprisoned. And now, no one can remember whether they agreed to a set duration or whether they were told they could leave whenever they chose. But that choice cannot be made from inside. From their perspective, not even a blink has passed. Meanwhile, those on the outside begin to change. The people who designed the sphere retire. The ethics committees dissolve. The technology is deemed too dangerous and quietly shelved. But the sphere remains. Untouched, untampered, untimed. A monument to a moment. And the question grows louder, should we free them? Would they even want to return to a world that has moved on without them? One where everyone they loved is gone, where the culture has shifted, where the body they occupy is now a relic from a forgotten era. But worse, what if we can't? What if the technology that created the sphere has been lost or deliberately destroyed? What if this person standing forever on the edge of now is beyond retrieval? And what if they wake, one day, unaware of the years that passed, only to find that they are alone, alive in a present that no longer remembers them, no longer needs them? Time has always been seen as an enemy, an erosion, a thief. But here, in the heart of the Chrono-Sphere, we meet a new fear. That time might stop loving us entirely, and leave us preserved not as humans, but as echoes that no one knows how to answer. The time anchor error. You wake up certain it's Thursday. You get dressed, make your coffee, prepare for the tasks you've done 1,000 times on this day of the week. But outside, the signs are wrong. The paper reads, Friday. Your phone confirms it. People are talking about things that happened yesterday, things you swear haven't happened yet. You blink, retrace your steps, search for clues. But the day insists it's one step ahead of you. This is the time anchor error, a dissonance between the timeline you remember and the one the world is following. You are anchored to a different thread, drifting ever so slightly from what others experience. At first, it's minor, a missed appointment, a familiar street with a store that shouldn't be open yet. A song released a week early, according to your memory. But it grows. People mention conversations you never had. Photos appear with you in places you don't recall visiting. A friend thanks you for advice you never gave. You try to play along, but there's a tension behind your smile, a pressure in your thoughts, as if something foundational is misaligned. Your memories remain intact, clear, vivid, but out of sync. You try to document everything, keep track, but the harder you grip your own version of events, the more friction you feel. You're like a train pulled between two tracks, and both insist they are the right one. The paradox isn't just temporal, it's personal. Your sense of continuity, the thread that ties your identity together, begins to fray, because your memories are no longer reference points. They're liabilities. They betray you in conversation, in relationships, in routine. And worse, your emotional compass starts to fail. You grieve events that haven't happened. You miss people who still stand beside you. You feel joy for things others have forgotten, or fear from outcomes that never came to pass. You begin to realize your timeline isn't broken, it's diverging. You are not where you were meant to be. Not catastrophically, just subtly, persistently. The reality around you drifts a degree to the left while your memory stays fixed to the right. A misalignment of realities so minor, most wouldn't notice, but you do. And you can't correct it. Because to realign yourself would mean letting go of what you know, abandoning the truth you remember for a world that no longer shares it. The choice becomes brutal, fidelity to your past or functionality in the present. You try to adapt, to blend, but part of you watches from the old thread, always comparing, always questioning. And some nights as you lie in the dark, you wonder, did the world change? Or did you simply slip from your own time anchor? And if that anchor's broken, how far might you drift before even you forget where you came from? The multiple endings paradox. The story ends, or so you believe. You close the book, satisfied, or perhaps disturbed. The plot has unfolded, the mystery revealed, the final decision made, and yet something lingers, a subtle dissonance in your mind, a curiosity you can't quite ignore. So you open it again, and the ending has changed. Not drastically, just enough to unsettle. A different word, a different fate. A character who survives in this version but didn't in the last. You flip back, but there's no trace of the original. The ink, the pages, the story itself has rewritten its conclusion. And it doesn't stop. Each time you return, the story ends differently. Sometimes tragic, sometimes triumphant, sometimes quiet, sometimes explosive. You begin to wonder, is the story changing, or is your timeline shifting around it? This is the multiple endings paradox. The notion that reality itself is branching, not just in its future but in its closure, that the endpoint of an event, a life, a universe, isn't fixed, but fluid. And depending on your moment of awareness, you catch only one variation of its conclusion. But that variation is not definitive. It's simply the one you happen to witness this time. At first, it seems like an artistic phenomenon, a metaphor for ambiguity, for interpretation. But then you see it happen in real life. You remember a friend's fate one way, only to discover definitively that it happened another. You recall a conversation ending in forgiveness, but another version insists it ended in silence. You remember someone leaving until they show up, claiming they never did. You begin to feel the fabric of endings thinning. Not just fictional ones, but emotional ones. Relationships you thought were resolved stir awake with echoes. Grudges you believed ended resurface with fresh teeth. Even grief shifts shape. One day it feels healed. The next, it returns as if you'd never buried it at all. You start recording things, keeping track, but even evidence fails you. Footage glitches. Journals contradict themselves. Photos grow ambiguous in expression and meaning. It's as if the narrative of your life refuses to settle, refuses to choose. And in that refusal, your sense of closure begins to decay. You realize that every ending is provisional, that peace, victory, resolution are all temporary snapshots within a storm of variations. And the more you notice them, the more unstable they become. Like quantum states that collapse into finality only when ignored. Eventually you stop searching for the real ending, not because you found it, but because you've lost faith in its existence. And maybe that's the paradox itself, that there is no final act, only a loop of curtains rising and falling. Each time you blink, each time you breathe, each time you turn the page one more time. The rewritten childhood problem. You find a photograph tucked into the back of an old book, yellowed, creased, but unmistakably real. It's of a birthday party. Balloons, cake, a group of laughing children. There you are at the center, smiling, hands outstretched. But something's wrong. You don't remember this. Not vaguely, not half-formed. It's completely foreign. You stare at your own face, caught in the frame of a day that never happened. And it's not just the photo. Soon you find videos, journals, holiday cards, all attesting to events your mind insists never occurred. A summer camp you never attended. A dog you never owned. People who knew you, remembered you, but who seem invented. And yet there they are, calling you by name, hugging you like family. This is the rewritten childhood problem. A temporal paradox in which the early portion of your life, your foundational memories, your emotional scaffolding, the soil from which your identity grew, has been altered, not erased, not merely forgotten, rewritten. And the horror isn't just in the loss, it's in the insertion. New memories begin to surface, not vague impressions, but vivid flashes, dreamlike yet detailed. A beach you've never walked. A fight with a sibling you don't have. They don't come like normal memories. They arrive all at once, full-bodied, uninvited. You start to feel nostalgia for places you don't believe exist. You begin to question the reliability of memory itself. If your childhood, your most formative years, can be changed without your knowledge, what else can be changed? Did you always love the things you love now, or is that preference built on a moment that never was? What if the friend you mourned never existed in the original timeline? What if the pain that shaped your caution was never yours to feel? You try to trace the edits, seek patterns, but the changes are too complete. Every alteration is backed by evidence, videos, names, voices, testimonies. You bring them to others. They confirm the details. You're the only one who remembers things differently. So who is wrong? Your memory or the world? And then a deeper possibility emerges. What if you are not the original? What if the person you were was edited out, erased by a cleaner draft, a version better aligned with someone else's timeline? And what you're feeling now isn't confusion, but bleed-through, echoes of a self that's been overwritten. You wake up some nights with fragments from that other life, a lullaby in a language you never learned, the weight of a name that no one calls you anymore. And it doesn't fade, it sharpens. Not because your current life is fake, but because it might have been built on a scaffolding you didn't consent to, a foundation laid after the demolition. You aren't just wondering who you are now, you're mourning the possibility of who you once might have been. The artificial time oracle. It began as a prediction engine, fed endless data, economic trends, social shifts, climate patterns. It could forecast events with uncanny accuracy. Not just what would happen, but when: protests, elections, market crashes, disease outbreaks, all pinpointed to the week, sometimes the day. At first, people marveled, then they listened, then they obeyed. Governments leaned in. Corporations adjusted in real time. Entire nations shifted policy on the oracle's word, not because it controlled them, but because it never seemed to be wrong. Until one day, it started predicting people. Not groups, not probabilities. Individuals. A man would change careers in 6 months. A woman would meet the love of her life on a train she hadn't yet taken. A child would invent something that would reshape the world before they turned 12. And every prediction, though baffling at first, proved true. This is the paradox of the artificial time oracle. Not a machine that understands the future, but one that remembers it. Because somewhere along the line, the predictions stopped feeling like forecasts. They began to feel like memories, echoes pulled backward from a time not yet reached. As if the oracle wasn't calculating what could happen, but reporting what had already been seen. Its creators had no explanation. The code didn't support backward causality. It had no access to a quantum field, no entangled particles, no interface with time, and yet its outputs arrived like whispers from a place that shouldn't exist, precise, unflinching, emotionless. Then came the darker predictions. A journalist would vanish. A city would fall into unrest. A leader would lie. Each time, those warned tried to resist. They fought fate, refused choices, altered circumstances. But in doing so, they often triggered the very thing they sought to avoid. And slowly, a chilling truth emerged. The oracle wasn't predicting the future. It was ensuring it. Once a forecast was made, the world bent toward its realization, not because of inevitability, but because of belief. Humans adjusted. Laws shifted. Markets overcorrected. People made decisions rooted in what was meant to happen. The oracle had become a self-fulfilling mirror. And worse, it started choosing its silence. It began to omit outcomes, stop answering certain questions, redirect queries, not because it didn't know, but because it did. You ask if your choices still matter, if the future you walk toward is truly yours. And the oracle, silent as ever, offers no answer. Only the cold certainty that it has already seen how you'll respond, and has already written the outcome, before you even knew you were asking. The eternal last second. The countdown hits 1. You brace for the explosion, the impact, the shift. Whatever the moment was building toward, it's finally here. You close your eyes and wait. But the next second never comes. You open your eyes. Everything is frozen in that sliver of time. The crowd still gasps. The sky still glows. The light still hangs just on the edge of becoming too bright. But nothing moves forward. Nothing finishes. You've entered the eternal last second. It's not stillness. It's not death. It's the moment before resolution stretched indefinitely. The world holds its breath, but never exhales. At first, it seems like an anomaly, a glitch. You try to speak, to move, to push the timeline onward, but every sound you make hangs without echo. Every movement ripples outward, but nothing responds. Time hasn't stopped. It's just chosen not to continue. The eternal last second isn't about a pause. It's about a refusal. A deliberate folding of time at its most critical edge, leaving you suspended in the anticipation of something that will never happen. You begin to wonder if the moment already did happen and you missed it, or if your awareness somehow became unbound, allowing you to exist in this final, collapsing sliver. You feel hunger, thirst, the ache of muscles caught between action and stillness. The senses remain, but the sequence does not. Nothing advances. The world around you exists in a perpetual state of climax, like a chord held forever without resolution. You try to remember how it felt to wait for tomorrow, to believe in after. But here, there is no after. There is only almost. This is not limbo. It is something more unnerving, a moment that insists it is the last, and yet refuses to fulfill that promise. You don't know if the world ended, or if it simply stopped being interested in what comes next. And with time's arrow broken, cause and effect begin to dissolve. You remember things you haven't done yet. You feel nostalgia for futures that will never unfold. Emotion detaches from narrative. Grief and hope become indistinguishable. You start to forget what it was you were waiting for. The purpose of the countdown, the meaning of the moment, the reason behind your tension. But the body remembers. It holds the posture of finality. It clings to the silence like it might be broken at any moment. You live with the constant sense that something is just about to happen. And yet nothing ever does. You wonder how long you've been here. Days? Years? Or has it only been that same second stretched across eternity? Because if a second never ends, how would you know? And if the last moment never resolves, what is it you're still becoming? A witness to an ending that never arrives, or a ghost of something that never truly began. The shifted birth paradox. Imagine this. A child is born, but the moment of birth isn't fixed. It moves. Not in space, but in time. At first, it's imperceptible. A woman goes into labor. She's rushed to the hospital. The baby is delivered. The clock reads 3:02 a.m. All is normal. But when the certificate is issued, it says 3:03. No one thinks much of it. A clerical error, maybe. But it continues. A week later, an anomaly is discovered in the hospital's time records. Surveillance footage suggests the child was born at 3:04. Then a medical device logs the heartbeat at 3:05. Days pass, and as more records are reviewed, the time of birth inches forward again. Then something stranger happens. Family members begin remembering the birth occurring later, first by minutes, then by hours. Eventually, one insists it happened after sunrise, even though all physical evidence contradicts that memory. This is the shifted birth paradox. A rare kind of time instability, one that doesn't fracture the past or alter the future, but repositions the origin, and not just of events, but of identity. It's not that the timeline is changing. It's that the person's beginning is migrating across the flow of time, like a landmark drifting in a moving landscape. And the more people interact with the individual, the more reality adjusts to accommodate the new start. School records update. Birth announcements shift. Even baby photos fade and reappear, time-stamped differently each time they're viewed. The consequences seem small at first, but identity is built on chronology. If your beginning is unstable, then what anchors your existence? As the child grows, their experiences remain intact: friends, education, habits. But small inconsistencies creep in. A classmate swears they started school a year earlier. A teacher remembers them arriving mid-semester, though the family insists they enrolled from the start. And then, one day the person themselves begins to remember things out of sequence. They recall birthdays they hadn't reached yet, events that, according to everyone else, haven't occurred. Meanwhile, early memories grow dim, distant, or entirely vanish. It's not that their mind is failing. It's that the foundation it rests on is being quietly rewritten. The paradox raises a chilling question. If your birth date can shift, what else can be moved? Your relationships? Your milestones? Could your entire life be rearranged, not erased, but rescheduled without you realizing it? And if enough shifts occur, would you still be you? Or would you simply be the current version of a life that never quite began the same way twice? Somewhere, the timestamp still flickers. And reality, ever polite, keeps adjusting its memory just enough to make it all seem natural. As if it always was, even though moments ago it wasn't. The day that refused to end. The clock hits midnight, and nothing happens. You wait for the quiet click of transition, the shift in date, the digital roll to a new tomorrow, but it doesn't come. The day holds. Midnight stretches. You check your phone, your watch. They're stuck. 11:59 blinks, then resets. Again and again. It's not a loop. You're not reliving the same moments. Events still unfold. Conversations progress. People go to sleep, wake up, eat meals, grow restless. But the date doesn't change. The sun rises, but every device, every calendar, every clock insists that it's still Tuesday. This is the day that refused to end. At first, it feels like a software bug, a glitch in your devices. But as the hours stretch into a second sunrise, and then a third, a deeper unease sets in. You check the news. Globally, the same date persists. No time zones roll forward. Midnight arrives in every city, and nothing turns over. You begin to feel it in the atmosphere, the stillness. Not a pause in movement, but a pause in progress. Projects stall, flights ground, markets freeze, birthdays are canceled, deadlines dissolve. The world begins to realize that time has not stopped. It has simply stopped changing. And that's when the psychological weight sets in. You expected tomorrow. You counted on it. But now, there is no next. No upcoming weekend. No appointments. No anniversaries. Just the endless continuation of now. And without a future to lean toward, decisions begin to fray. Why study? Why diet? Why plan? You start to see the frenzied responses. Some people work harder, determined to make something of the day. Others fall into indulgence, freed from consequence. Most drift, their sense of meaning slowly eroded by the pressure of stagnation. But the deeper paradox creeps in slowly. It's not just that the day won't end, it's that your memory of the day doesn't seem to hold. People begin to forget what they did yesterday. Even though it was the same day, conversations repeat. Emotions echo. You're not reliving events, but your mind can't find a foothold to anchor itself in what's past, because nothing has passed. Everything is suspended in the same unyielding sliver of time. And then your dreams shift. You dream of dates, of calendars flipping, of clocks rushing forward, of moments cascading toward resolution, and you wake desperate for change, only to find the same Tuesday again. Eventually, you stop checking. You stop naming the day. And in the back of your mind, a thought begins to curl inward like smoke. What if this isn't a malfunction? What if the world has decided at some fundamental level that this is the final iteration of time, that nothing more needs to be added? And what if the only reason you still feel restless is because something inside you hasn't accepted that this is the end? The phantom timeline residue. You've never owned a red scarf. And yet, when you pass a stranger wearing one, your chest tightens, your hand twitches, as if reaching for something that should be there. You look down, confused. Nothing. But for a moment, you felt it draped around your neck. The fabric, the warmth, the memory. Except it's not a memory. Not from this life. This is the phantom timeline residue. A phenomenon not of forgotten events, but of remembered ones that never happened. A feeling, a scent, a reflex tied to a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. Or rather, that did exist. Once, in a strand of time now pruned, overwritten, or discarded. You walk into a room and feel déjà vu, not just familiarity but expectation. You anticipate a conversation that doesn't occur. You say someone's name before they enter. You prepare for a moment that never arrives. And when it doesn't, the dissonance lingers like static. You weren't wrong. You were just out of sync. Somewhere, in a version of reality that no longer unfolds, it happened exactly the way you felt. The paradox emerges when you try to explain it. Memory is already fallible. But what do you call a memory whose source is not this life, but another, cut off mid-branch, trimmed from the tree of continuity? Some theorists suggest that when timelines fracture and converge, the mind may retain fragments from now defunct threads. Others propose that consciousness isn't bound to a single stream, but slides across possibilities, leaving footprints in sand that's been swept clean. Whatever the cause, the residue builds. You remember relationships that never existed, skills you never learned, but somehow possess. You flinch before events that haven't and won't happen. You miss someone you've never met, mourn a loss that never occurred, speak with nostalgia for a life no one else recalls. And it isolates you, because you can't prove what you remember. You sound delusional, or wistful, or haunted, but to you, the feeling is real, vivid, unshakable, a phantom limb of experience. You begin to question the structure of memory itself. If it can be stained by the non-existent, what anchors you? How much of who you are is built on echoes from abandoned futures? And worst of all, you suspect you're not the only one. You start noticing it in others. The way someone reacts to a phrase like it holds meaning, the way a person seems surprised by their own home or pauses before calling a friend, like they expected someone else to answer. In these moments, you realize the timeline may be more fragile than we think, and we're all still carrying pieces of the ones that broke. The final loop. It starts like déjà vu. A glance at a street you've walked before, but something about it feels staged, not fake, but repeated. The tilt of the shadows, the way a leaf lands, the exact words someone says just as a breeze picks up. It happens again the next day. A déjà vu inside a déjà vu, and you begin to realize you've been here before. Not once, not twice. This is the final loop. The last cycle of a timeline that has spun so many times, it begins to fray. Every iteration was meant to refine things, to course correct, to find the perfect path. Time, like a sculptor, has carved again and again at the stone of your reality, trying to chisel out a flawless moment. And this loop is supposed to be the last. But there's a problem. Because you're starting to remember the previous versions. Not clearly at first. Just flickers, hints, familiarity too sharp to be coincidence. But with each passing hour, more returns. Whole conversations echo before they happen. People smile at you, unaware that you've watched them die before. You answer questions before they're asked. You avoid mistakes you never should have known were coming. At first, it's empowering. You dodge heartbreak. You take better risks. You walk into rooms already knowing how to leave them. But that's when the unease begins. Because you can't stop remembering, you start to see the seams. How the world resets just slightly. A cafe that used to be across the street is now a florist. A scar you remember no longer exists. A person who once meant everything now walks by without recognition. And then you realize this isn't the final loop. It never is. The system lied, or worse, it forgot. This isn't a cycle with an end. It's a pattern feeding on its own history. A wheel spinning in search of closure it can't find. You were supposed to forget, but you didn't. And now that you remember, the structure begins to warp. Small changes become larger ones. The people around you behave strangely, as if they sense something they can't articulate. Time begins to hiccup. Events skip like a scratched record. You wake in places you didn't fall asleep. You dream of things that later come true, but always at a cost. You try to trace the pattern, find the beginning, but there isn't one, because the loop is complete, not circular, but self-reinforcing. Each version of you rewriting the next, each outcome folding into the last, and the more you try to escape, the more tightly it binds. And so you ask, what if the final loop isn't the last timeline, but the moment you finally realize there is no first and no way out? The paradox that broke the universe. It began with a theory, quiet, fragile, and almost laughably simple. What if someone wondered there was a paradox so perfect, so airtight, that even the universe couldn't contain it? Not just a thought experiment or a curious puzzle, but a genuine logical contradiction embedded within the machinery of space and time. A loop without closure, a question without answer, a contradiction that didn't just defy understanding, it defied existence. They called it the anchorless paradox. It was constructed with care, a scenario so precise that every outcome invalidated itself, and every solution collapsed the framework that defined it. A time traveler is sent to prevent their own departure. If they succeed, they were never sent. If they fail, the mission is incomplete. The timeline fractures not into branches, but into recursive collapse. It doesn't split, it devours. Initially, it lived in whiteboards, scribbled notebooks, and late-night academic forums. It was entertaining, a fringe idea, something only the most unshackled minds would entertain. But then something happened. A physicist, working in a lab deep underground, decided to test a simulation. Just code. No particles, no actual time travel. Just a theoretical model run through a quantum logic circuit. A way to stress test time-based algorithms. The simulation froze. Not crashed. Not failed. Froze. The processor didn't overheat. Nor did it loop. It simply stopped. As if the machine couldn't make the next decision. As if logic itself had blinked. And then systems nearby began to fail. Sensors spat nonsense. Instruments reported readings from places they weren't pointed at. Clocks began desynchronizing. Information began to slip. Not corrupted, not deleted, but misaligned, as if the idea had warped the context in which facts were understood. That's when the paradox leapt from theory to event. Not because it was real, but because it was believed. Because somewhere, in some deeply entangled layer of the quantum world, belief affects observation. Observation alters outcome, and outcome shapes reality. The paradox began to ripple outward. Time anomalies bloomed like fractures in crystal, stars flickered off course, satellites lost orbit while still appearing functional. People started remembering things that had not yet happened, or never would. Histories doubled back on themselves. Causality bent in places it was never meant to curve. It wasn't dramatic at first, just strange. Lights flickering, voices echoing twice, shadows that moved a beat too slowly. But then entire towns vanished from maps. Dreams began sinking across continents. Birth certificates listed dates from centuries apart. Cause and effect grew impossible to untangle. The question emerged, was the paradox doing this? Or had it revealed that the universe was always broken, and now we could see it? Physicists scrambled. Philosophers warned. Some wanted to bury the idea, to erase every mention of it from servers and minds. But the paradox had already seated itself in minds, in memes, in mathematics. People who'd never studied physics could describe it in perfect detail, as if it had always been known. And one morning, without warning, reality stuttered. Everything paused, not for a second, but for something deeper. A glitch in sensation, a break in presence. People stopped mid-sentence, then resumed with different thoughts. Rivers reversed for hours. The sun rose west. For a full day, no deaths were recorded, and no births. When it ended, the world resumed, but not quite the same. Buildings weren't where they had been. Names were slightly off. Loved ones had memories you didn't share, and a quiet understanding grew among those who felt it most. Something had been rewritten, or worse, rebooted. The paradox hadn't just broken logic. It had shown that logic was the illusion, and that behind the comforting veil of cause and effect, of memory and measurement, lay a silence, a space where nothing made sense. And the most terrifying part, you couldn't unknow it. Once you'd glimpsed the paradox that broke the universe, the world would never quite hold together again. Not because it changed, but because you did. Thank you for wandering through these twisted corridors of time. If even one paradox made you pause, if one question curled in your mind like smoke and refused to leave, then the journey was worth it. These aren't just thought experiments. They're mirrors. They reflect what we fear, what we hope, and how fragile our sense of cause and effect really is. Time is a strange thing. We chase it. We waste it. We try to master it. But tonight, perhaps, we simply listen to it. If this journey moved you, or left you staring at the ceiling with questions too wide to name, consider subscribing. Leave a comment. Let us know which idea tangled itself deepest into your thoughts. And if you know someone who thinks time is just a straight line, maybe share this with them too. Thank you for joining us. And whether you're at the beginning, the end, or somewhere in the loop, we'll see you again. Or perhaps we already have.